Okay, we're about ready to go live. All right, colleagues are here, so if anybody, looks like attendees are coming in, so that's good. Waiting until the clock actually says 6. But anything we need to do before I start? Okay. Fair enough. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Homelessness and Housing Task Force of the City of Hayward. Consistent with the California executive orders, and the health officer orders, we are, of course, here again in Zoom, and we'll be using this platform. But that we're glad that people are attending and certainly happy to have public comment. We are also having translation services available. So Yolanda, would you tell us about that, please?
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're offering Spanish interpretation service. If you are joining the meeting using the Zoom application, you are able to select either English or Spanish. Spanish interpretation is now live. Panelists can now select English from their interpretation button. When selecting Spanish, we suggest that you select mute original audio. Our Spanish interpreter will now make the announcement in Spanish. Thank you.
Hola, buenas noches. Queremos avisarles que esta noche estaremos ofreciendo servicio en español. Esta junta está siendo traducida al español simultáneamente. Para las personas que quisieran recibir la información en español, por favor de seleccionar el canal en español en la parte de abajo de su ventana. Les recomendamos que pongan el audio original en silencio para que puedan escuchar la intérprete en español. Gracias. Thank you.
Gracias, ma'am. Can we have the roll call, please?
Council Member Salinas.
Present.
Council Member Wahab.
Here.
Council Member Lamlin.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. All present and accounted for. Excellent. So now we go to our public comments. So this is public comments on items that are not part of tonight's agenda. If you're wanting to speak on either the strategic plan or the stimulus funds, there will be a separate public comment time for those. But please, I see we do have a hand up. So Yolanda, would you go through the process and then we'll call on the folks.
If you wish to speak and you're using the Zoom application, please click on the raise hand button. If you're dialing in, please press *9 to join the raise hand button and *6 to unmute yourself. If you're dialing by a phone, please mute yourself so that there's no excessive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any raised hands for open public comments. So we'll close that portion of public comments and go on to approval of minutes and entertain a motion. Okay, thank you. And
Second.
Thank you. Do you need a roll call vote or is acclamation okay?
I think that's okay.
Okay. So a motion and by Councilmember Wahab, second by Councilmember Salinas, and I certainly don't object either. Hearing no other concerns, we'll consider those adopted. Thank you. So at this point, we'll turn it over into our work session, and I'll start with Assistant City Manager Ott.
Good evening, Chair Lamnin and committee members. We're here for two exciting agenda items to talk about our homelessness strategic plan called the Let's House Hayward plan, as well as for both homelessness and housing, talking about the federal stimulus funding and how we're proposing some draft ideas and proposed ideas about how to allocate some of those funds towards both homelessness and housing. We did create two different items, one on homelessness with the strategic plan, and as part of that, made recommendations from that plan on how we are recommending using some of the stimulus funds for homelessness issues. And then the second report is on housing programs and our recommendations of what programs we're recommending kicking off and how to allocate some of the stimulus funds for that. But because the stimulus funding is kind of a overarching conversation, I think we are going to go forward with the presentation on the Let's House Hayward strategic plan. We're going to briefly go over the funding recommendations just because they do have a strong nexus with the plan. We're essentially implementing programs that are recommended in the plan. Then we'll really focus on a discussion on the Let's House Hayward plan and not on the stimulus funding recommendations. Then once we have direction from the task force on the Let's House Hayward plan, we'll turn it over to Christina Morales and her team to present the housing programs. Then at the end, we'll have two slides, one for the homelessness expenditure recommendations and one on the housing funding recommendations. So we'll have the funding conversation as part of the end of the housing report. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but we're trying to break it up a little bit. And as we go, we can kind of remind you of what we're proposing. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Lobodon, for our acting community services manager, to kick us off on the Let's House Hayward strategic plan conversation.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Any guidance on sharing the screen?
Do you have the green screen share button or share screen button?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right. I'm more used to working in teams. All right. So can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation in full?
We see it with the advanced slide notes.
Yeah, it's the notes section.
Thank you.
And I can't tell you how to get out of it.
Okay, now we see your full PowerPoint page.
Thank you. Okay, still it looks like it's in. Sorry, everyone. Any luck? No?
No.
That's okay.
Okay,
Jessica, let me give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah. You can stop sharing. Okay, so you all should see the whole thing, and now let's try and go into. Oh.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry about that.
Did that work? Can you see just the normal slide? Okay.
It did go. Yep, it worked.
Okay,
Great.
great. Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Jessica.
So good evening, everyone. Tonight we will be presenting to you all on the Let's House Hayward strategic plan implementation strategy and the federal stimulus homelessness expenditure recommendations. Next slide. So as Jen mentioned, we'll primarily focus the presentation at the first part of the presentation on the implementation strategy of the Let's House Hayward plan. We'll provide an overview on staff recommendations for American Rescue Plan Act stimulus funding, discuss how we have integrated council feedback since meeting with the full council on April 20th, and then hold a discussion with everyone to solicit feedback. So our recommendation this evening is that the Homelessness-Housing Task Force provide input on the Let's House Hayward strategic plan, draft implementation strategy, and federal stimulus homelessness expenditure recommendations. So to kind of situate this discussion in where we're at in the process, we've been working on this plan for some time now, and I really wanted to just focus kind of around what has happened since meeting with the full council on April 20th, which Amy will go in depth to talk about, but we've held several meetings with the steering committee. We are here this evening to solicit feedback, and then we'll be returning to the full council in July for plan adoption, as well as appropriating the stimulus funding. And I will be turning it over to Amy now.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to be spending some time providing a high-level overview of the implementation strategy for the Let's House Hayward strategic plan. And just for reference for council members and the public, this is attachment 2 that I'll be referencing in the meeting packet for today. So these are the goals of the Let's House Hayward strategic plan. These goals were presented to council on April 20th. So we're just restating them here. The 3 overarching goals of this plan are to formalize a coordinated and compassionate citywide response to homelessness and develop wider community understanding and engagement. And this is really kind of our partnership and community engagement goal. Goal 2 is to increase the availability of and reduce barriers to homeless crisis response services. So we're thinking of this as really the big services goal. And then the final goal is to ensure access to and retention of affordable permanent housing, which is really kind of the affordable housing focused goal. To build out the implementation strategy, Homebase, our consultant, has hosted, since April 20th, has hosted 3 working meetings with members of the Let's House Hayward Steering Committee. That's a group of community experts and leaders who have been along throughout this whole process, providing input. Each working meeting focused on one of these goals and gave folks the opportunity to really kind of roll up their sleeves and dig into the specifics of what it would take to achieve these goals. All of that got rolled into the implementation strategy. That's an attachment 2. So the way the plan is structured, we've got goals, strategies, and action steps. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because with strategic planning, this type of stuff can get a little jargony. So each of these goals, of the 3 goals we just reviewed, has a series of strategies that, when implemented, will achieve the goals. That's the design. In turn, each strategy is associated with specific action steps or activities that will carry out the strategy. We'll look at this more closely when we review the implementation strategy itself, but it's kind of nice to think of this as sort of like a funnel of, here's the big goal, here are the strategies that will achieve it, and here are the action steps that actually implement those strategies. So, as you probably noticed, the implementation strategy conveys a lot of important information at once. So I wanted to walk through the legend here with all of us, because we're going to look at images of the implementation strategy document, and I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. So the color coding piece refers to the stage of implementation for each of these action steps. So if it's colored in yellow, that means that we're in kind of this like research planning beginning stages. The green is when we're launching or starting the implementation of an activity that's either brand new or is being expanded. And then the blue is when we've made it through that place and implementation is ongoing. In some instances, you'll see action steps where it doesn't have one of these colors. So for example, it might be all blue. That's an instance where it's a thing that we're already doing, so we don't need to plan out that kind of implementation startup or research. Additionally, the symbols provide more information about the cost of the activity and its alignment with other key city work. So if it's got 1 asterisk, there's no additional costs other than staff time. So all of this work factors in staff time. But beyond that, there may be contract costs or vendor costs to do the work. When those costs don't exist, we still wanted to make it clear that doesn't mean they're free, but that there's staff work happening there and that those have associated costs. If there are 2 asterisks, that means that the action step itself that we anticipate some type of one-time cost. Most of these would be in the form of infrastructure or other kind of capital improvement expenses. And then the little I is an existing city project that was part of a division or department's work plan prior to Let's House Hayward, but because it was happening and it's relevant to this work, we folded it in. And then two little I's is that the action step aligns with a strategic roadmap project. So we wanted to make sure that's really clear, that this project itself is, the strategic plan itself is a project in the roadmap, but it also overlaps with other roadmap activities. And we wanted to make sure that we're mapping that out clearly for folks. So that is the legend. Let's move on to what's actually in the strategy. So we're beginning with the first goal. Again, this is kind of our big regional collaboration, coordination, community engagement goal. And this is a lot of information. It's an attachment to, I'm not going to read it all at you, but I want to highlight that there's three main strategies for achieving this goal. The first is formalizing partnerships. The second is developing a funding and corresponding evaluation strategy. So we're making sure that the work we're doing, we're measuring whether it's working or not. And then the third is around educating and engaging the community. As we go through this, I want to highlight some just kind of key action steps that are in here. Some key ones to highlight related to this goal. 1.1 D and E. We're excited about those. They're intended to formalize our partnerships with local education providers. 1.3A is another one. I mean, I'm going to say we're excited about all of these, but we also are excited about the ones I'm calling out. 1.3A is developing a public education campaign. This is an important one that we're planning to do up front. It will help humanize homelessness and educate community members about the homelessness system of care. One thing that we heard a lot from our big community engagement push was that we had a lot of folks attend who are just Hayward residents who don't work in the system, who don't work in any capacity with homelessness, but care about their unsheltered neighbors and want to know what they can do and want to know more about it. So this is really intended to help educate those folks, let them know how they can help their neighbors, and also to kind of build empathy and build compassion around what is really a tough issue, and remind folks that these are people who are experiencing homelessness next door. Goal number 2, this is our increasing availability of and reducing barriers to homelessness crisis response services. Services takes on a lot, and so there's a few more strategies in this one. We're looking at 5 main strategies to achieve this goal. The first is expanding shelter capacity. The second is developing response services that really protect the dignity and the health of folks who are unsheltered. The third is testing ways to improve our outreach and engagement. The fourth is increasing supportive services. And what we mean by supportive services are those that are beyond just providing shelter or getting folks inside. It's kind of the wraparound holistic picture of what do they need: economic development support, so education, job help, and meeting some other key basic needs. And then the last strategy is supporting providers and staff capacity to do all of this work. And that really came from our steering committee as well as from our big community outreach push, where we heard from a lot of providers that if we're going to move this forward and do all of this new work or expanded work, that we have to make sure that we're protecting the well-being and capacity of the providers who do the work every day. Some of the key projects on this one, 2 of them you'll see tonight in the discussion of the American Rescue Plan Act stimulus funding. So that's expanding the Hayward Navigation Center Annex, which is the non-congregate hotel that was started up recently. The second is expanding the winter warming shelter. So both of those you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. Another one that we wanted to highlight that falls under this, this goal, and I can actually advance the slide. Sorry, I forgot that was my job too, is under strategy 2.4, is supporting the implementation of the mobile mental health team that was proposed through the Policy Innovations Workshop. So we know that while this team may not be the main leads on that work, we want to make sure that it overlaps with this plan as well, and that we're integrating with those policy innovation workshop programs as appropriate. The final goal looks at ensuring access to and retaining affordable permanent housing. So the strategies for this goal there's two of them. The first is continuing to invest in eviction prevention and anti-displacement work that the city's already been doing. And the second is prioritizing the development of housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. So some key projects for this one include the ongoing implementation of existing policies that the city has that prevent displacement. So this includes our residential rent stabilization and tenant protection ordinance, which creates a rent increase threshold for covered rental units to help prevent displacement. There's also another project that you'll be hearing a bit more about tonight, which is developing a shallow subsidy program, which is one of the proposed stimulus projects. And I think Council heard an update on that back in April as well. And then another project to highlight here is evaluating the Affordable Housing Ordinance's effectiveness in providing affordable housing opportunities to prevent displacement. So I believe now that was a whirlwind, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica to discuss the American Rescue Plan Act funding recommendations.
Thank you, Amy. So the American Rescue Plan Act, through this source of funding, the city will receive about $38 million, of which staff is recommending allocating approximately $12 million in total to housing and homelessness projects. So of this bucket, staff is recommending allocating about $7.5 million towards specifically the homelessness projects. So the projects that staff has identified for recommendation for funding allocation were intentionally selected not only through the data collection process through the Let's House Hayward plan, but also recognizing the spectrum of housing insecurity and really identifying resources at multiple stages within that spectrum. So these projects will address increasing placements into permanent housing, providing emergency shelter, and preventing future homelessness. Additionally, staff is recommending a $1 million contribution to the existing Hayward Navigation Center to ensure fiscal stability as the city budget recovers, and to allow for the city to identify funding and allocate funding for emergent needs that may come up.
Jessica, can I also just jump in on that last slide quickly? Is I think another consideration were programs that we could implement relatively quickly that didn't have significant kind of outreach and engagement, so that we could really provide services quickly. And so those are why some of these programs are a continuation of other programs that otherwise would have sunsetted, because we can have quick outcomes without additional staff costs or additional outreach and kind of startup costs.
Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
So to talk a little bit about the different programs, I know that you all are very familiar with a lot of these programs. As Jen mentioned, they're extensions or expansions of currently existing programs. So for the Hotel Annex program, the recommended allocation is $3 million, which would provide 2 years of programmatic and hotel expenses to extend this program. Expansion of the winter warming shelter. The recommended allocation here is $2 million. And I did want to note, we have received some recent budget from First Presbyterian Church to further identify what the cost for a day resource center would be in conjunction with the winter warming or the winter shelter portion of this project. Amy will be talking more in depth about council feedback and what we heard on April 20th, but this is really in recognition of the desire to have a joint daytime center as part of this program. And we will be seeking guidance. There are some trade-offs around, do we have just the the night portion for a longer amount of time, or do we have the night portion and the day resource center for a shorter amount of time? And the difference is it could be about 2 years for just the winter shelter portion and a year and some change for the day resource center plus the winter shelter portion. The shallow subsidy homelessness prevention program is a program to provide approximately 40 households with 12 to 18 months of ongoing rental subsidy. And really this is to focus on the prevention end of the homelessness spectrum. And then again, the Hayward Navigation Center contribution really to ensure ongoing fiscal sustainability for the city.
Okay, so I'm going to pop back in now. It was really important to us after hearing council's feedback on April 20th that we make sure that the plan is responsive to that feedback. So these are kind of the overarching themes that we heard from council on April 20th, and we wanted to address these and let you know the ways in which the plan will be responding to them. So the first is that there's kind of a lack of specific policy change, particularly for, we heard, addressing eviction prevention and developing affordable housing. So the plan itself focuses on policies, programs, and services. So it's comprehensive for individuals experiencing homelessness and those who are most at risk of being homeless. And the plan will include action steps, and you should see them in the implementation strategy for the continued implementation of existing homelessness prevention policies to get at that eviction prevention piece, as well as looking at the affordable housing ordinance to get at the development of affordable housing. We also plan on including kind of an addendum that lists out the existing policies and programs that the city has to prevent displacement. Next, and we heard this loud and clear, that regional partnerships are important, particularly with the county, and that the accountability piece needs to be more explicit. So we'll be including a narrative overview of the existing regional partnerships and action steps that address these opportunities to collaborate regionally. The next theme that we heard was that the partnership with our nonprofit partners, the community-based agencies, needs to be more explicit. And we've got action steps in the implementation strategy that highlight these partnerships, including opportunities to engage them on a quarterly basis around the work, as well as working to understand like their capacity restrictions and the ways that we can support them in doing the work. We also heard about programs and policies, and the plan should target specific subpopulations. I think a core value of this plan is that one size fits all doesn't work. It's not a sufficient approach to this. So the plan will include a narrative overview of the data that describes who our homeless population is, and the strategies themselves and the implementation strategy will include action steps, excuse me, that take the needs of specific subpopulations into account. So youth, individuals with justice involvement, individuals with mental health or substance use issues, and those groups. Next, we heard that the plan needs to include more context regarding who exactly is homeless in Hayward. There will be an integration of existing data, including our point-in-time count data, to describe the demographics and characteristics of who's experiencing homelessness in Hayward, including the population of folks who are actually from Hayward originally and who are experiencing homelessness in Hayward. As Jessica was saying, we heard from you that there is a significant need for day center services. And as Jess was describing, there's this trade-off with the South Hayward Parish winter warming shelter that we've got some estimates from their team looking at the cost of expanding the winter warming shelter as well as expanding the day center. So we're working closely with them and are interested in your feedback on those options. We also heard that the plan should, similar to prioritizing regional partnerships, should also be looking at aligning with other regional efforts. I think the mayor particularly highlighted MTC and ABAG's Plan Bay Area 2050. We're also looking at Alameda County's Homelessness Action Plan, Everyone Homes Plan. Recently, All Home produced a strategic plan that we're looking at very closely. So we are working hard to work with Homebase to make sure that we're taking into account all of these different pieces. And then the last piece is that the plan should include long-term metrics for success. So that'll fall into the narrative description, but we also wanted to address that one sooner than later for you. So attachment 3 in tonight's item summarizes the plan's approach to evaluation and data. It has a list of kind of process outcomes as well as process indicators. So what types of data we're looking at to see if we are on track with our implementation, as well as outcome indicators, which look at are we meeting milestones of success in our implementation. So that's sort of our response to that feedback, and we're open to hear if you have additional comments or follow up on that during our discussion today. In terms of our next steps, I think Jessica alluded to this on that great big timeline at the top, but these are some upcoming dates and activities related to moving this plan forward. July 13th is a big day. This is where we'll be going to the council to appropriate the federal stimulus funds that we'll be talking about more tonight. And this is also where we'll be going to council to review and decide whether or not to adopt the Let's House Hayward plan. By July 13th, council or this task force body will have seen all the main elements of the plan. So July 13th is really where you get to see it all tied up with a bow and all those pieces put together. And then additionally, we have some ongoing next steps that are related to the stimulus portion of tonight, and that is that staff will return to council to review the federal stimulus expenditures in 6 months. So with that, I know we have some public comment, but I wanted to put up our discussion prompt just to have it in the front of everyone's mind. As Jennifer mentioned at the beginning, we're going to focus now on providing feedback on the Let's House Hayward plan specifically, and we'll hold off on the federal stimulus funding feedback until we finish the next presentation. But these are the questions that we would like to get into with you all. But for now, I will pause so we can move to the public comment.
Okay, thank you both very much. Yolanda, would you give us a reminder about how to do public comments? And then for anybody wishing to comment on the strategic plan or anything that was just presented, feel free to do that and let us know that by raising your hand. And Yolanda? There you are.
So if you wish to speak and you're using the Zoom application, please click the raise hand button. If you're dialing in, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. If you are streaming the meeting through Zoom on your computer, please unmute yourself so we don't have disruptive feedback. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Yolanda. And it looks like our first speaker is Lacey Amode.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Lacey Amode, Housing Justice Advocate for the Hayward Collective. I'm mostly calling in to congratulate staff and also council for the contents of this report. I guess particularly staff, I know you all worked on it. There's a lot. It depends on the details, but there's a lot at first glance at the high level that would be in a housing advocate's wish list. So I just want to congratulate you on, including getting at all three sides of the housing crisis problem with the preservation, production, and protection. I just want to especially congratulate, including the policy point about providing assistance for community land trust acquisition. I would just say that, and I see that it doesn't have funding yet, but I would just say that the preference for the Hayward Collective and many housing advocates would be that the CLT would receive preference before a nonprofit developer would. leaving out the case where a nonprofit developer or nonprofit would be administering a CLT. And regarding reviewing the affordable housing ordinance, we've said this before, we think currently the in lieu fee is too low. So I know that doesn't say that's what's going to happen, but that's our position. And of course, it's not possible to require that there are on-site units. Many cities have found a way to make it the case where there's more incentives to do so. So that almost always ends up being the case. And that would be our preference. Going in, I just wanted to highlight some policies that are also, like I said, promising. There's just some conditions I just wanted to highlight that would be important to us. So, and again, get back to the congratulations, just for putting such a significant amount of money from the stimulus funds and showing that we're going to invest in this. That's really great. So expanding the services for the Navigation Center, especially the non-congregate, that would be our preference, more non-congregate. And of course, housing first, permanent supportive housing is a preference, but I understand that is very expensive. The shallow subsidy, we would prefer an outright UBI over the, requiring that it be a rental subsidy. But if it do be a rental subsidy, we would say the condition would be, we need to also look at the rent increase threshold, because it would kind of be, an interesting situation if we're allowing, certain rent increase thresholds and then we're giving a shallow subsidy and we're funding a rent increase threshold that we're not trying to lower. I'm running out of time. So I just want to plug a couple of things that are missing. A public lands policy, a way to how we can equitably treat our public lands. And lastly, it would be great to see more investment in the office that administers the RRSO, so it can have more of an impact. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lacey. Next up is Didicus Ramos.
Mute. Am I unmuted now?
You are.
Oh, fantastic. I actually made it work. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. Congratulations to staff for the report. I think that we're in the right direction. I'm here as a member of the Community Land Trust, the Eden Community Land Trust, and right now we're under the Oakland Community Land Trust, so we have some good creds in both those areas. The way that housing is built in Hayward and in other places is what concerns us the most. And there was, in the announcement to tonight's meeting, there was even the idea that either a land trust or a developer would be used to build housing in Hayward. That's not the best way of doing things. A land trust removes the land from the speculative market, and that actually makes it more valuable to Hayward, not as a dollar amount, but as a resource that will be used for the people of Hayward. So we encourage you to consider first a land trust and getting land to a land trust that will then, with you, hire a developer and use it in that order to provide housing for people in Hayward. Our ultimate goal is, of course, home ownership, because we believe in stakeholdership, and the more valuable stakeholder is the person that will stick in Hayward regardless of the situation and say, I'm going to make Hayward the best place in the Bay Area to live, as opposed to, it's hard here, I'll go someplace else. So we encourage the council and the staff to pursue those avenues as much as possible. I have a lot more things to say, but I'll write a book and you can read it there at your leisure. But we are available to help you and to work with you as partners in this whole effort to make Hayward the best place in the Bay Area to live. Thank you.
Thank you. And Colin Thoromoto.
Yes, hello. My name is Colin Thormoto. I'm an organizer for the Hayward Collective, and I'm going to be echoing a lot of Lacey's points. I just want to again say thank you for putting together this report. It's fantastic. It looks like there's a lot of good strategies and implementation steps in there. We again want to support the idea of doing community land trusts, because they're fantastic programs that, as was just commented, keep people in Hayward and focus on home ownership and making Hayward a great place to be. Our support with conditions is some of the safe parking and sanctioned campsites we support that on the condition that it does not lead to an increase in sweeping. And also that the shallow rent subsidy program explores and implements the some tenant protection measures as well. And again, want to highlight that the 5% rent threshold should probably be reconsidered, especially as Lacey pointed out, that as that goes up and we will be continuing funding it through the program, that could become problematic and even more unsustainable as time goes on. And also, it's important that the RRSO program receives more funding so that it can be more wide-reaching, have more impact, and have the option to offer more services, as $150,000 for a city of 160,000 people seems like a very challenging sort of concept, especially as the report points out that at last count, there were several hundred people who were homeless every day. So having a potential expansion of that funding would be amazing going down the road, even though financing is very difficult at the time. So thank you very much again, staff, for the amazing report. And I look forward to hearing more about it in the upcoming presentations. And I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much. And next is Teresa Resendez.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I again want to reiterate what everybody else has been saying. We appreciate all your efforts and hard work regarding this matter. And everybody knows that with the federal funding, the main goal is to avoid litigation regarding the homeless population. We can hear it in the news that different counties and different cities are now being sued because of their lack of attention to the homeless population. So we're very aware that it has to be addressed soon and substantially. Excuse me, I again want to bring up my preference for a focus on nonprofit funding regarding Christian organizations. I sent the City Council a link to the Jimmy Hale Mission, which is a Christian-based nonprofit organization, and directly from their website, it says, hold on just a second, please. That 90% of the homeless population in the community is plagued by substance abuse. To combat this, the mission has shifted its focus from rescue to recovery. By addressing these deeper challenges, we can help our clients once again become self-sufficient and productive citizens. Our active recovery program is an in-depth, clinically structured Christian group approach to helping residents understand and overcome the very issues that contribute to their substance abuse. In addition, each client works individually with a professional counselor throughout the 15-week process. They provide residents with an educational curriculum through Stewart Learning Centers that includes adult basic education, GED preparation, and workplace skill sets, as well as training for accredited short-term certificates, industry-based certifications, and collegiate enrollment. So in summary, that is what I'm hoping we can point our dollars towards to help them to eventually be able to support themselves and to become no longer reliant on substances, and also the treatment of schizophrenia and the maintenance of their medications is extremely important as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mr. Castillo?
Hi, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. I'm going to comment now because I don't want to lose my opportunity. I'm not sure if I'm commenting a little early, but I think that's okay. My name is Nestor Castillo. I'm one of the founders and board members of the Eden Community Land Trust. And we, for the members of the public who aren't aware or aren't familiar with the Community Land Trust or the Community Land Trust movement, we started back in 2019 as a community-driven process. And I'm sorry for our translators if I'm speaking a little quick. I'll try to slow it down just to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation. And this is not just a local effort, but an international effort to address the housing crisis. And I want to congratulate staff and thank staff for these sort of forward thinking and really progressive policies that are being put forth to address the housing crisis. We've been talking a lot about COVID and the vaccine, and we have to think about the social vaccine as well, right? And we know that housing is one element of the way we keep people healthy and keep people from being homeless and keep people from and keep people inside their homes. I think one of the challenges with the Community Land Trust and seeing a dedicated source of funding for Community Land Trust is often the Community Land Trust model is lumped alongside other affordable housing models, which is great because we see them as partners, but at the same time, even though it's not a competition, it ends up being a competition, and we end up competing for the same sources. But nonprofit affordable housing developers have a much longer time doing affordable housing, and so that it's sort of an imbalance there. And so seeing a dedicated source of funding specifically for community land trusts is something that is really exciting, and something that's really exciting for the city of Hayward, because as I forgot to mention, we not only serve the broader Eden area, which includes the city of Hayward, but also includes the unincorporated parts of Eden area, which includes Hayward Acres, includes Cherryland, and also Ashland, San Lorenzo. And, I think what I heard earlier was a sort of regional approach, right? That this housing crisis can't be just, in the city of Hayward, but has to be sort of a regional approach. So we're working with county partners as well to try to find those resources to fund these projects and get these projects to move forward. So really excited about these proposals that are being put forth, looking forward to seeing more, especially as it pertains to dedicated funding towards community land trusts to get that started. I'm out of time, so thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Wahab, did you have a question for Nestor?
No, I was just putting it to get ready.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And last we have George Syrep.
Hi, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Hi, council members. Hi, staff. I just wanted to call in support of the report that's being placed before this task force today. I think this is an amazing way to capitalize on a golden opportunity. Land trust is a new model that helps keep community wealth in our city rather than lining the pockets of private property owners. So I'm really encouraged to see this on the table. And as I was reading through the report, I was also pleased to see that the task force also supports programs like the tenant right of first refusal. And I'm hoping that we could adopt similar programs like that in a more robust way across the city so that we can make all housing in the city less speculative and preserve housing for folks that live in a place that's already becoming more and more rent burdened. So I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of these changes go through. I think they're in line with what the Hayward Community Coalition was asking for when we wanted to double our funds addressing homelessness and housing. And I'm just excited to see this on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. And Renee?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Badruzaman, she, her. I'm really wanted to thank and congratulate the staff, the city staff, for a wonderful report. I'm here representing Eden Community Land Trust. And wanted to echo a lot of what has already been said by so many of my community members, and much appreciation for that. Is that we would love to see and encourage the prioritization and offering of community members the opportunity to collectively own the land through a community land trust model. And in that process, ensuring that we can continue to work together with affordable housing developers, with the city staff, with the council members to maintain the wealth of the community through community-owned, community-stewarded land in perpetuity. That is our goal. That is our mission. We are excited to continue working with you all to do that. And also just wanted to share, I guess, a little bit more about my backs of their income, regardless of their race, regardless of their immigration status, really truly believing that and obtaining that are the values that we're bringing to the community land trust model. And again, how we're supportive of that by prioritization of community members owning the land. So I just wanted to share our congratulations and excitement for the plan and would love to continue working in partnership with the city and others. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And Alexis Villalobos.
Hey everybody, I want to be brief. I just want to say I personally am really excited to hear this conversation and see where you go forward. I'm fully supportive of the support, Hayward's support of community land trusts and community ownership of property. I'm particularly excited to see how you all move forward on the plan to help fund the acquisition of tax defaulted properties for community land trusts, and for for residents who currently live in those homes as well. I'm also excited to see what you do and say in regards to the reparations program, or the proposed reparations program that you will be discussing tonight. I am, as you know, currently the co-chair of the Hayward Community Coalition. You know us as HayCoco. We will be following along. I will be reporting back to the membership about how tonight goes, but I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. And not seeing any other hands up from the public, so I will close the public comment section and turn this back to my colleagues. And just a reminder that we'll talk about the strategic plan now and the financing part in the next item. So Mayor Pro Tem Wahab.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just want to tell staff, I know this is a long time coming, and I know that this, I know we're not going to talk about the funding just yet, but I do just want to say, I think that, this is an opportunity, right? I know COVID has been very difficult for a lot of people, and I'm glad that we are kind of able to pivot and kind of prioritize housing. And that's, one of the biggest goals. When I read the staff report, I was very excited because it was so many of the things that we have talked about for a while on this housing subcommittee, as well as the council, as well as in private conversations, as well as with community members. So I'm genuinely excited. And I know that when we are discussing this, and I want the public to understand this, that this is still very high level. Individually, they will come back to council with a little bit more detail. So, I know we have questions about this or that and so forth. And, I want people to be able to still communicate with our staff, who's very engaging, to be able to highlight their commentary, if you will, onto each specific line item and so forth. Overall, I just want to say I 100% agree with this strategic map of like where we're going to go. I appreciate also the years. I always have to hesitate with fiscal years. I always go like, when is that specifically? But fiscal year 2022 is next month. So I'm genuinely excited as to what that's going to look like for us. And, hopefully we can kind of get going. I also just want to state that, I spoke to our city manager a lot about some of the things that we proposed even 2 years ago that is on the map. So the tenants, action to be able to purchase the home that, they rent as a first right of refusal. I really appreciate that being part of it. I also like the fact that, we are trying to at least start a community land trust. That is, some cities are afraid of risk, and I'm glad that we are, taking it head on and really trying to work with the community. And I really just want to thank Ann Maris as well. I know I've had a lot of conversations with her on this and a lot of emails going back and forth, as well as everybody that spoke. So I'm very excited for that. I'm also very excited that you guys have kind of, I know I raised in a previous meeting when the shelters are only open for nighttime, but, at 7 a.m., 6 a.m., these individuals are asked to leave. I think that's incredibly important, that we kind of see if we can provide a 24-hour service, or even where they can leave their belongings if they have to eventually job hunt or whatever the case may be. That's one of the biggest concerns that a lot of individuals had. The RV thing, I know that when I walked around with our community safety team, I did kind of ask if we can have a parking lot that's can house individuals and be a safe spot for, people sleeping in their cars and RVs and so forth. So I'm glad that that's potentially an option. And obviously we want some security and safety for the individuals that do decide to go that route. And I hear the public loud and clear that, one of the concerns is that we don't want additional punitive sweeps or anything like that, just because, they feel more safe, in somewhere else. But it's an option to have. I was a little concerned about any discussion about the sales tax. I know we've brought this up in multiple different conversations throughout the last couple of months. I'm not a fan of regressive taxes. I think, and I've mentioned this many times in previous meetings, we have the highest sales tax, or one of the highest in the region, including more affluent cities and more, smaller cities, in fact, too, or cities our size. So I would like to see another option. Don't know what that's going to look like. Potentially even fees, as we know that businesses are coming into Hayward. I often believe that people should pay their fair share. So I just want to highlight that piece that, gives me a little heartburn. And at the same time, I want, while we are doing this, and I know that you guys are doing it, but it wasn't clearly laid out here or in the staff report, is specifically the community conversations, right? So for example, Lacey with the Hayward Collective, the individuals that spoke on the CLT, and Hey Coco, and any other group, including the nonprofits that we may partner with, just having that conversation is, what does holistically we are looking to house Hayward, right? I know each council member here has been, pushing different ideas and concepts and things like that. And finally, we have like a bucket of money to actually prioritize this and so forth. But I still also think that the nuances, the details, as these projects kind of develop a little bit more, we do want to talk to the subject matter experts, as well as the individuals that are going to be impacted. So I know that's going to take a little bit more effort and a little bit longer time frame, but I do think that that's a priority. As you guys know, I've also kind of shifted to, safety nets first, as I always say, and then home ownership opportunities. And it wasn't explicitly listed here, but we have the foreclosure plan that I am super excited for. I'm not going to lie, that was something I was very excited for. But then also the tax defaulted properties, and what was the other one? There was another one. Just making sure that whatever we do, we don't negatively impact people that are either already there, or if we're trying to create affordable housing, that we don't take housing from one, and things like that. So just being very cautious about that. And I know with this team in particular, our housing manager, Christina Morales, has been exceptional about making sure that we take care of that. So I just want to give kudos to the team, Director Ott, Assistant City Manager Ott, and basically everyone that presented. It was very, very clear. I know this is a huge plan. And, when we talk about regional leadership, this is what it looks like. And yes, some people are afraid of that, but I think that housing is a huge, huge concern for a lot of people. And it is to me, it is the center of a lot of the community needs that need to be addressed as a priority, and let's say the catalyst of security. So kids doing well in school, parents being able to stay and in their home and not have to move from place to place and figure that out, and just the cost of moving and so forth. The more stable housing we can provide in all fashions, and as I say, housing at all income levels, is a priority. And I'm so happy to see this. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm just going to shut up and say I'm very excited for this and hope that we can continue the conversation. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Salinas.
Thank you. I want to join the chorus of congratulatory remarks. I know staff has invested a lot of thoughtful time and a lot of work in this, and so it's not only a staff report, but the plan I think is really good. So thank you very much. I also, the other night when I was making my comments regarding the budget, one of the points I made, one of the comments I made was, I think the city listened, and I think, this was this past year, we saw a lot of issues highlighted through COVID, and maybe it took a pandemic for us to really sort of bring all of these things together that we've been working on over the years, and now we have dollars. We have money to actually do some of these things in a big way, and so that's good. And I wanted to make those comments first. A couple of questions. The shallow subsidy program. I know we're focusing on 4 or 40 families. I'm kind of. Can you discuss that program a little bit more and for a particular reason, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but have we, is there a program that we're just going to sort of pull off the shelf and implement, or are we designing it, or how is that going to be operationalized?
I can go ahead and address that. All right. So we're looking at existing programs that are being developed locally as well. Oakland has one that they're starting that is a rent subsidy, not a UBI program. And so we've sort of talked to the folks who are doing that one to kind of pick their brains a bit. That one, actually, they've got a partnership with USF to have it evaluated by Dr. Cashel over there. Am I saying her last name correctly? I get it wrong every time. The very brilliant woman at UCF, SF. And so we wouldn't be just making it up from scratch. It would definitely be evidence-based. We would have specific eligibility guidelines that are kind of prioritizing the folks for whom the need isn't forever, but instead would be kind of a runway to kind of like an off-ramp away from homelessness. So households who are vulnerable to homelessness but have had some past stability and maybe have had like a gap in employment resulting from COVID.
So let me stop you there, and I appreciate that. So let me ask this: would this program, would the approach, how can I frame this? Are we doing this to sort of, within the context of a sort of an ethnographic case study, research, to really look at best practice, look at, if it works, look at, if it does work, do something like this long term. Maybe we can find funding for this. I mean, I know what the outcomes are, and that's great. But on a high level, on sort of a policy shift level, what might come out of this? I'll ask the question that way.
Maybe I could just jump in here a little bit too, if you don't mind. I mean, I think all of these programs don't have funding forever, right? Because we're using one-time stimulus funds. So in essence, they are pilot programs or continuations of programs we already have, but certainly any new program we're starting like this would be essentially a pilot. Our hope is, and I just want to emphasize what this really is a prevention strategy. And Amy mentioned earlier the All Home Regional Plan that just came out, and it's all because for every one person that gets housed, 3 more people in the Bay Area are going to the streets. So if we don't stop people from going to the streets, we have a problem that we can't build our way out of, we can't shelter people out of this problem. And so there's been this real focus away, for instance, from supportive housing, not because we still need to do that, but because it's so expensive, but trying to find more efficient ways to keep people housed. And so this is truly a prevention strategy, because you can, for a lot less money, for those people that are kind of teetering on stability, who we know are most likely at risk of homelessness, if we can keep them housed, now we've stopped people coming to the streets. And now we can use the shelter options and solutions to actually solve homelessness, right? So that's what this is really targeted at, is that prevention strategy. But absolutely, I mean, our hope is that we can show over these next 3 years that it's working, along with Oakland and other programs, and really try to continue it either through state funding. I mean, the state's investing $12 billion in homelessness, so we might be able to continue it through other sources. But I just wanted to emphasize why we think this program is so important, along with those annex and navigation solutions.
Yeah. Well, and I also look at I look at these 40 households, I look at 40 families, and I look at these 40 families as what was I going to say? Keeping housed 40 families, I think is important. But also, if we invested, in these, in this shallow subsidy program, and we've proven, and we can prove that these subsidies do work, and whether we call it the universal based income, or whether, however way we call it, it could easily be scaled up. I mean, I think that we could find, something like this can be easily scaled up. And I think we can really find, we can, get even private funding for this, so anyways, when I read that, I was, because I'm looking at my point of reference, of course, is the Hayward Promise neighborhood. And, one of the things that we're really trying to focus on is, high alignment, high impact, outcome, high alignment, high impact work, right? That's sort of on a high level. And, in those areas that we've been investing in, we are moving the needle. And it's interesting because it is catching the eyes of not only of the federal government who's funding the grant, but it's also catching the attention of regional, funders who are investing in this kind of work. So that's what sort of piqued my interest about this. The other question I have is, I understand that we're going to talk about money next, and I understand that none of this is funded yet, but what are the low-hanging fruit? Well, one of the things we talked about in the council meeting when this was when this was in draft form, we talked about some of the low-hanging fruit. And have we identified some of the low-hanging fruit with big impact?
Well, I'll let Amy jump in, but what do you mean low-hanging fruit? That's something we can implement quickly?
Yeah.
Or like, what do you mean? Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean,
implement now and get off the ground. And I know that we have the navigation center. I know there's the annex. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think, and I'll let Amy jump in here, but I think our recommendations for funding are those low-hanging fruit, because we're already managing those programs. We don't have sufficient staff resources right now to add a bunch of new programs in community services. So these are programs we can extend, and they have really tangible outcomes in terms of serving, getting people housed and placed permanently, or preventing people from becoming homeless. So I think your low-hanging fruit, and Amy can correct me if I'm wrong, are really those funding strategies. Those are the ones we think we can, a shallow subsidy program, we already have set up a rent relief program. So even if we just have to adapt that, we already have an infrastructure there that we're familiar with. We can look at Oakland. So that's why I think the funding recommendations are those programs. Is that right, Amy?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I would just add that there are some other, I don't want to call them smaller, but like less high budget activities that are in the plan that we haven't called out explicitly tonight. That also will be impactful and are kind of low hanging. So actually I did call out the public education campaign. I frankly see that as an opportunity to build some buy-in to help increase potential resources down the line. So there's some other ones in there but I think Jen is right. The ones that we've got on the table tonight for the funding requests are the big low hanging fruit.
and the reason why I asked that is, and this was, now I just remembered why I brought up the 40 families, 40 households, is, you know, all eyes are on us, right? All eyes are on, you know, on us, just making sure, and with the hopes that this plan is successful and it does what you know, exactly what it's supposed to do. And, you know, if we can show 40 families, start with 40, if we can show that we, you know, helped and we were able to house and prevent homelessness, 40 families, that can be scaled up, that can be invested. But at the same time, with the low-hanging fruit work, it does get buy-in. I think, because right now there is an incredible amount of frustration throughout the community in every neighborhood, right? I mean, and you know, there's, I mean, we all get the emails. We know what the emails are, and I think that the faster that we can solve, or the faster that we can respond to some of the stuff that people see every single day when they're driving, you know, on Jackson and Harder, and I mean, you know, when they're driving down the streets, or they're on BART and they're, you know, in the train corridors, the faster that we can respond to those incidences and those situations, I think we can get bigger buy-in and support through the larger community. And I guess that's why I brought this up. So the other question, my last question is this, and I brought this up at the council meeting, and that was about the county, right? Where does the county fare into all of this? You know, I was trying to find, I might have missed it, but I was looking for, I know there's interagency work and there's interagency work, partnerships and collaborations. But what about, you know, tapping or affirming commitment through, and I think it's the A1 dollars, right? So, you know, we passed A1. I have not heard A1 mentioned ever since the election. I mean, there might have been some, you know, housing authority meetings that I'm sure the council member Lamnan has talked about and heard, but I mean, have we seen any of those dollars? And, you know, where, you know, I guess, you know, what is our relationship with that, and how does that fare with us?
Yeah, and I'll let Christina, our housing manager, jump in. But for instance, the city received a city allocation, which under your leadership and the council's leadership, you guys allocated very quickly towards the Depot Road project. So a big portion of the Depot Road, and that project is, my understanding, is under construction. So, but that was really the city allocating its own funds. But I understand there are regional pools that are being allocated to different projects. And Christina, do you want to jump in and talk about any other projects in Hayward that have received some of those regional A1 dollars?
Right. So two other City of Hayward projects, Mission Senior, Paradise, I think received about both of them received around $4 million each, and Pimentel Place. So we have two city projects that received the regional A1 pool. Depot Road will go into construction probably this fall, but they've applied for their permit. So we're really close to getting that one moving forward. And what we've seen around the county is that most of the jurisdictions have allocated all their funds. And we're just in this process of them securing all their additional funding so they can start building those projects. And some of the projects have already started construction throughout the county. What's left is the home ownership funds for development of home ownership housing, and then we anticipate that RFP will go out in the fall.
So what I would suggest, I know this was suggested the other day, but what I would suggest is we need to put some signage in front of these projects, right? And it say your A1 dollars at work. Here's what we voted for. And here's, you know, this is what we paid for, and this is what, you know, the money is being applied to. So just so that, you know, the casual driver, the casual passerby, you know, can see it. So, well, good. Lastly, you know, some of the comments that were made, you know, by the callers for public comments. I think the community land trust work, those are things that we've been working on, and I know that we've been certainly exploring those. I've certainly supported those and supported those models and those types of models. I was especially pleased to hear, a general acknowledgement of the work of the committee and of staff. And so that was good to hear. So thank you to all the callers for doing that. My last point is I'll be looking forward to this when it comes back to us, and I'm looking forward to the next discussion about the money. So thank you.
Always fun to talk about the money, right? So I'm going to make my comments and then I'll circle back. So obviously, thank you to the callers and the folks who are attending today, and lots of thanks to our city staff and to the consulting team. It's really exciting to see not just the plan, but also the shift in the city about really working with folks with lived experience, being on the steering team, being in the empathy interviews, and that's happening through. We heard that in the public safety innovation as well, and just really appreciate that work, and that it is part of the plan, baked into the plan going forward as well. So just wanted to appreciate that especially. And it occurs to me we have sort of in the middle of creating this plan, the youth shelter emerged. And I know there's talk about looking at some things, specific populations, et cetera. I'm just wondering, actually, I'm going to hold that question because it's more a money question, I'm realizing. So I'm going to come back to that one. And, but I'm going to appreciate the point about the A1 dollars, your A1 dollars at work, and even your tax, what is this, the stimulus dollars at work. I know that was done a lot for the road repairs coming out of the last recession. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, Mark. Thank you. And then I'll be interested to see, I appreciated that you included in the staff report that there's a lack of staffing to really be able to do some of this work, and appreciate that. And I know some of the callers mentioned that as well. And so, as we're doing this lean innovation work around public safety, and does it make sense to shift some positions into mental health work, I'll be interested to see, how does that model work, first of all, and then second of all, as we tease out what are these positions specifically, is there room in the fiscal year 23 to Aisha's point, to create these positions, what are they? And then so I am very supportive of the day center project. I appreciate the trade-off of, less time, that's probably less time overnight, but there's having run one of those programs, there is value to that. And First Press has a proven track record of doing that in Castro Valley. So so moving up the implementation of that, and I'm in favor of. And that one, sorry, just go through my notes here. And I appreciated the comment about looking at how do we collaborate, that things are not just on the city to solve, that there are nonprofit providers, there are faith community members, there are folks on the street who have strengths and talents, and all of that can be tapped into solving this and facilitating a way for those communications and coordination to happen. And where it isn't just, the city staff listening to more stuff to do from the community, but really engaging in, here are the service gaps, here are the service opportunities, together, what can we do? So I appreciate and look forward to more details about that as we go forward. And then I'm not entirely sure I understand in the plan, looking at strategy 2, there's the item 21B, which is continued oversight of the annex, which is $1 million. Well, anyway, continued oversight of the navigation center, which is separate from 21C, which is the annex itself. And so can you help me?
It's the existing contract that we currently have with the annex. And then it's the activity of expanding. We played with it and tried to do it all in one line, but it really muddled things up. So the hope is to make it explicit that this is the ongoing thing that we're currently doing, because it'll go into fiscal 22. And then here's the activity to expand it beyond that into future years.
Got it. Thank you. And I apologize in advance for the background noise. We've got 2 meetings going on tonight. So as such things will happen. Okay, that helps a lot. And then is the expectation that as COVID wanes, there'll be more capacity at both the South Hayward Parish, former South Hayward Parish site and the Navigation Center site?
Yeah, so at the Navigation Center site, we are currently making plans to stagger the capacity back up to the intended capacity. And additionally, we did bring that 3rd trailer on site to increase the capacity even above what it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And then for South Hayward Parish, they also will be working towards recompression once we have the go-ahead from the county.
Great, I appreciate that. And lastly, 31F is the flex funds for diversion and problem solving. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about what you're thinking there. And is this $50K enough to do that?
Jessica, do you want to speak to the flex funds a little bit more as part of the HRC?
Yeah, so recently the Housing Resource Center for Mid-County has been changed hands from Abode to Bay Area Community Services, and in doing so changed contracts. And so looking at how to support the operator in this new role and to be able to provide flex funds, problem solving funds. So it's really one-time funds to be able to bridge somebody's experience with homelessness into housing and or like into a shelter. So it's a one-time source of funds, and that's why it's that smaller pool.
Can I just add, Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have these funds programmed into our Navigation Center budget for people who come to the Nav Center. These are a separate pot of money, but just the service that we provide to our Nav Center residents is to provide flex funds so that they can get what they need to be placed into permanent housing. So this is kind of taking that same model, just divorced a little bit from the Nav Center, but for people who we're not able to place in the Nav Center, but that may be experiencing homeless, but need some of those same services. Is that right, Jessica?
Exactly. And those would be administered out of HEDCO Housing and Wellness Resource Center.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And something else about that, but I get it. Thank you. Okay, so I'll go back to Mayor Pro Tem Wahab.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things that were mentioned. I do want the nonprofits to be closely monitored. I know that I've mentioned this in the past, and the reason why is we get a lot of different mixed results and a lot of emails from residents impacted or being serviced by these nonprofits that are not favorable. Right, it's not exactly what we want. So close eye on individuals that we fund through this, right? And then I also just wanted to tell the larger public also, one of the things that we, a couple of these projects that have kind of been semi underway, but we've been, the funding was the biggest concern. There's significant support to expand this, and hopefully, we build the model and other cities absorb this. But a lot of our employees are also very excited to kind of learn a little bit more about this and see what else can happen. But I wanted to ask Assistant City Manager Ott, I will get it eventually.
Okay.
The down payment assistance, right? I know that's something that I have deeply, deeply wanted. We have it for our Hayward employees. And, you know, I kind of wanted a rotating fund for Hayward residents where, you know, they put their 3 to 5% down and we cover them. And then once they purchase their home, they maybe refinance or remortgage and we sell the specific loan that we give to a Hayward resident to the bank that owns the home.
And that item is actually in the next.
Okay, so sorry,
let's come back to that.
Yeah. But I eventually am going to want to ask more questions about that, just FYI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, we're happy to. Yeah, and I agree. It is in the next item, and Christina can mention because we started with that because we heard that loud and clear from you, and then we actually expand it to more of a wealth building. But we can have that conversation in the next agenda.
Okay,
item.
perfect. Right. I'll ask my question then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Not seeing anything else for the strategic plan, except a lot of excitement and a lot of gratitude, which is wonderful. So with that, we will move on to item 2, which is the stimulus funds. Send that back to
Christina will be presenting. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm going to do the sharing again, so please let me know when I get it.
There you go.
Yes. 18 months? Is that how long we've been doing this? Nailed it.
Great. Well, thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the task force. I'm Christina Morales, the Housing Division Manager, and we will be discussing the proposed federal stimulus housing funds. At the end of my presentation, we will discuss the funding of both the recommended funding allocations from the previous report included with the report that I'm going to give right now, which includes 4 additional programs. If we could advance to the next slide. So to begin, we're going to discuss kind of the background and overview of what the federal stimulus is available for housing. And also, we want to provide additional information, key background information about Hayward housing needs, and also the disparate impacts on community of colors of housing, different housing policies and existing policies related to COVID-19 and how that relates to the proposed programs that we have before you tonight. So we have 4 proposed programs, which we'll discuss in a little more detail later, discuss the funding recommendations, the next steps, and it will wrap up with discussion. And my understanding is after that, we will come back for comments on the proposed funding allocations. Next slide. So this evening, we are requesting input on the proposed federal stimulus programs for housing. I just want to clarify, we have 2 programs that we're really looking for implementing in the almost immediately in the next fiscal year, which as was pointed out is we're talking about July 1st. And then we have some that really need are more conceptual at this time and that we would continue to work on them and develop them and just really looking for some preliminary input on them. So we've provided some background information about the federal stimulus so you understand the context and the funds that are available, information about the current disparate impacts and the housing crisis, and information about the existing relief programs so that you can have a better understanding of why we selected the programs that we selected. So first, I believe a lot of this was discussed in the previous presentation, so I'm going to move quickly, but basically there is about $38 million available to the city from the federal government for federal stimulus to address the economic and fiscal impacts of COVID-19. Money was allocated under or identified under community safety and economic recovery for outward facing programs to the community in the amounts of $10 to $14 million was identified for housing related programs and homelessness. And I believe this is based on the presentation before has been updated to about $11 million, just almost $12 million. So we'll move to the next slide. And so we're looking for, in terms of allocating specifically to the housing programs I'm proposing tonight, is about $4.25 million. The stimulus expenditure plan is to mitigate, as we discussed earlier, those are separate items, but we'll be discussing the funding later together comprehensively, so you have the full picture. After we discuss these with this task force, and I believe for the other funds that are available, they'll be discussed with other committees. The staff will return with an expenditure plan for the federal stimulus funding on July 13th. And then the funds have to be expended fully by December 2024. And that's a critical component as we're developing these programs, just to know that we not only have to design the programs, we have to make sure that we can expend those funds in time. So in some contexts, flexibility is helpful so that we can shift and change just to make sure we can meet that expenditure deadline. I feel like we've discussed this a lot in the context of what we do in the Housing Committee, and I believe everyone's fully aware of the Bay Area housing crisis and the fact that it's been acutely felt by communities of color. There's intense displacement pressure, especially to members of our community who are low income. Rents and home values have increased as people with higher paying jobs move to the area, and it's outpacing housing production. Lower income households are being displaced, and this has been felt higher by Black and Hispanic households that are more rent burdened than white households. So it is making it more difficult for them to accumulate wealth. We also want to note the history of discriminatory housing policies. So, for example, there have been restricted housing covenants that have prevented African American households or Black households from living in certain communities, even within the Bay Area. Redlining, use of zoning to exclude Black households from different neighborhoods, and then just the lack of access to financial resources to be able to purchase homes. So funding from lending institutions in order to purchase. So all of this is compounded over time where we have this real wealth gap between white households and Black households. And we have a disparity in housing stability as well. So housing discrimination, among other forms of racism, has contributed to this significant wealth gap, and we're expecting that this is only going to be exacerbated by COVID-19 because of the disparities we've seen and the higher impacts we've seen on communities of colors, and especially Black community members, making them a higher risk of these negative impacts over time. And then I also wanted to point out, as we were talking about, sorry, making Amy go back, there was one more thing I wanted to point out, is that there's a substantial wealth gap between white households and Black households across the country. So the median wealth of a white household as of 2016 was $171,000 compared to a Black household being $17,600. So there is these long-term impacts of this inability to access stable housing. All right, so when we're looking, in addition to help us inform the conversation and the programs, when we look at the city, counties, and state response to COVID-19 and to address these disparate impacts, there's been a lot of focus on rental assistance. The city itself has provided over $1.7 million in rental assistance. The county is currently distributing over $60 million to Alameda County residents. So resources have been allocated, moratoriums have been put into place to protect tenants from displacement. The city has also proactively thought about foreclosure prevention, allocating $75,000 to education and one-on-one counseling. This helps our residents leverage existing legislation that prevents foreclosure because the federal government has required all federally backed loans to go into forbearance if the homeowner has indicated that they can't pay related to COVID-19. So just making sure that community members are aware of that and they have access to resources. And then the City Council also approved $319,000 for a foreclosure prevention loan program so that individuals who are unable to to refinance or secure loan modification after being in forbearance have financial resources to help them address the arrears that they currently have, and so that they stay housed. Forbearance periods last 6 months and can be extended up to 18 months. And so what we're seeing, and if there's no extension on the federal requirement to provide forbearance, then we will likely see forbearance periods sunsetting around midsummer. So that's when we expect that we will see greater need for financial resources to help people address the arrears from their loans that they were unable to pay. So based on this background, staff has come up with 4 proposed programs. We have move to the next slide. The first 2, we're looking at programs that we would be implementing in this upcoming fiscal year. So starting in July, we would be working on these programs. And these would really, as I was discussed earlier, going for the low-hanging fruit, the things that we are already working on and that we want to add additional funds to. Relocation assistance, which would support existing legislation for tenant relocation assistance. And then the next 2 programs, wealth building and tax defaulted foreclosed property, are really more conceptual at this point and looking for just a sense of whether staff should spend time on further developing these programs. And if we were to work on them, would be working on them in fiscal year 2023. So the first program I want to discuss is the foreclosure prevention loan program. And it's really, as I mentioned, we want to supplement the existing allocation that was provided. Our intent is to pair this with legal services so that it's not just, okay, if you're a homeowner and you're in arrears, we will provide you a loan. There would really be an analysis of whether any of the rights of the homeowner were violated, and if so, making sure that the lender complied with all federal requirements in lending and state requirements. And as a last resort, if we can't get the lenders to modify the loan or help the homeowner to refinance out of their loan, then we would provide the financial assistance that's needed to make sure that people stay housed. The good news is we're seeing the real estate community painting a picture of the future of there being sufficient equity in property that people will be able to avoid foreclosure. However, they did identify that about 15% of the people in forbearance have no exit strategy. And I think that's where we would be focusing our attention. As you notice on the slide, we're estimating we'd help about 60 low-income households. So the intent of this program is really to help those individuals who are low income, are not able to address their arrears by any other means, and we want to help them stay housed, because the likelihood of re-entering into the rental market, that they will find rents that are higher than their existing mortgage payment, and housing will be even less affordable for them. So we're really looking at targeting the population that would still struggle as tenants if they were to re-enter into the housing market, and not likely to downsize and use their equity to buy something smaller. All right, next slide. The next program, in July of last year, the City Council approved a tenant relocation assistance program that required property owners to provide relocation assistance for no-fault evictions and for temporary terminations of tenancy related to substantial repair. What we have noticed since implementation of the ordinance is that, and it's likely due to the fact that there is a moratorium in place on eviction, so there may not be a lot of evictions happening for no-fault evictions, but a lot of the cases we're seeing are related to health and safety issues and natural disasters. So we've seen about 17 households that have been impacted by the need to relocate due to health and safety issues. And along with that, it has been difficult to secure the financial resources from the landlord. So what we are proposing is that the city would provide the financial assistance, and as stated in the existing legislation, we could recover the cost to the city by either placing a lien or exploring the possibility of providing a loan to that property owner, so that we could provide immediate assistance to the tenant who's displaced, and then recover the funds at a later date, as there may be a discussion as to whose obligation it is to pay, whether the landlord is required to pay, but we get immediate assistance to that tenant that's facing displacement. So this would be a program that we would look to implement immediately, because we see immediate need for this as people are being displaced and they're still struggling with COVID-related issues. We want to try to rehouse people as quickly as possible, and having that financial resource would help them. Next slide. And so here's where we move on to our more conceptual programs. The first one proposed is a wealth building program, possibly a reparations program, depending on the feedback from the task force. But really, it's intended to mitigate the disparate financial impacts of COVID-19 that will further widen the racial gap by providing financial assistance and support developing financial goals. Nationally, racial and ethnic minorities are overrepresented in COVID-19 cases. This is also the case locally. In Alameda County, Hispanic Latino individuals are 22% of the county's population, but make up 40% of COVID-19 cases. Black and African American individuals are only 11% of the population, but represent 17% of COVID deaths in the county. In addition, the disparate health impacts of COVID-19, communities of color are experiencing a disproportionate economic impact. So the intent of this program is to mitigate these disparate impacts. And so, as I mentioned, this is really conceptual. We don't have any idea how many people it would serve or what the financial assistant would look like. Really looking to develop this with using community engagement and having the intended recipients inform how the program would be developed. We're proposing setting aside $2 million for use of the programs. And I think the main question we have for the task force is that should this be designed as a reparations program for Black households?
Christina, can I just interrupt for a second? Just to get back to Councilmember Wahhab's point, we did start actually thinking about this program as a down payment assistance program. But then when we had conversations and we looked at other programs and we had some conversations, the idea of not being prescriptive about how to build wealth, because different people, at different incomes have different ways of building wealth. So it could be that education as an investment in wealth building. And so that was why we expanded it to wealth building, which doesn't preclude this from being used for a first-time home buyer program or for help in that way. So certainly open to your thoughts about that as well. But this kind of started as that and then kind of expanded once we started talking to people. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think if we move to the next slide, I think this is where we are illustrating kind of, as we brainstorm, kind of throwing out some ideas of what types of programs it could look like. I think down payment assistance is the first thing that that comes to mind. As we look at the program, I think the obstacle we have with the down payment assistance is that it really favors people who are mortgage ready. And so there's definitely an opportunity here, and I think it can be used for that, but also looking at the various needs of community members, where they are with their personal goals, wanting to have some sort of flexibility is how do you help somebody leverage these funds and turn it into something useful. And different community members will have different needs that need to be supported financially. And also we're hoping that it would be paired with some sort of support, like housing counseling or financial planning, business or career development. So we're looking to also not only just provide the financial assistance, but what kind of education or support would community members need in order to actually use the asset not as a one-time fund to address a problem, but how do you make it grow and turn it into something that can be more productive in your life. And so if this program is supported, we would develop this, as I mentioned, through a community engagement process, because we feel that we don't want to be prescriptive. We want to understand from the community how they best think it would serve them. Next slide. And then the next program, I think we've talked a lot about a tax defaulted program. Want to introduce foreclosure, the acquisition of foreclosed properties as well. The city has the ability to interrupt tax sale properties and pull them off the rolls and help transition those to either a community land trust or a nonprofit developer. There's also legislation, SB 1079, that allows a tenant who currently occupies a property that's foreclosed to have the ability to have the last and final offer on a property. Also included in that would be cities, land trusts, nonprofit housing developers. In a lot of cases, these legislations exist, and the entities that take advantage of them are investors, and the properties leave the community's hands. So the intent is to make sure that the properties stay in the hands of community members or are retained as long-term affordable assets to the community. One of the obstacles we have, and we noted this in our report last year when we discussed tenant first right of refusal, is that funding is usually needed in order to make those programs successful. So how do we provide a tenant funding in order for them to acquire a property that they live in that's being foreclosed in? And then conversely, how would we provide a land trust funding they need to either acquire tax defaulted property or also leverage this foreclosed property acquisition process? So how do they take advantage of it? So it would still require more development, figuring out what that amount would be. I think we've made an estimate that it would take around $125,000 to $150,000 per unit. But we would look into what it would take in order to create a program that not only helps identify to a tenant, what is the process I need to understand in order to acquire the property I live in that's being foreclosed on? And then here's the financial resource to bridge the gap between what the tenant can afford and what the house is worth. So trying to figure out those two pieces of the puzzle and figuring out the right amount of assistance for a community land trust to be able to acquire the property. And in the essence of maintaining that flexibility, including nonprofit housing providers, because we do have an expenditure deadline, and that if we cannot make it successful in one way, we may need to be able to shift to another. That said, in the context of nonprofit housing developers that develop large projects, they may not be looking at the smaller opportunities that are likely to become available under the tax defaulted and foreclosed acquisition program. Really anticipating it would be smaller single family homes or smaller quadruplexes, not really the large with $1 million, we probably wouldn't be helping anyone acquire large properties. The idea is that we would be providing long-term stable housing options to address housing stability. And once again, we would work on this more, come back to the task force with a fully developed program once we work out all the details of how do we help people access their rights under existing legislation, and then what is the right funding amount that we should be providing to make these successful. And also looking at the housing opportunities that will be coming up for tax defaulted properties in the next calendar year. So we are proposing $1 million of funding for this program, but would come back with more detail. All right. So the next steps is, as was mentioned in the previous presentation and earlier, is that we're really having preliminary conversations about these programs, but the budget appropriation for the stimulus funding would be discussed on July 13th. We would, if these projects are supported, and the first two, we would look to implement them in the upcoming fiscal year, this July, for our foreclosure prevention program and the relocation assistance emergency fund. And I did want to point out one thing I failed to mention on the Relocation Assistance Emergency Fund. We're hoping that the funds are replenished. So as we provide funds to the tenants and the landlord's property is liened, when they clear that lien or pay the city off, the funds would then be replenished so that then those funds could help the next tenant. The only time when that wouldn't be the case is when it is an emergency, such as a fire. I think we've had one tree that's fallen on a property that's made a home uninhabitable. And in those cases, the landlord's not liable for relocation assistance. So in those cases, the funds would be a direct grant. But in other cases, if the landlord is liable, the city would recover those funds. Staff would develop, then we'd be developing programs for that are more conceptual and looking to work on those in fiscal year 2023. And that would be the wealth building program, and whether or not it's a reparation program is yet to be discussed. And then also the tax defaulted and foreclosed property acquisition program, is there's still a lot of questions to be answered on how we would make that work, what the process would look like. And then ultimately the funding needs to be fully expended by December 30th, 2020. All right.
2024.
So 2024. Thank you. I've gone back a year. We skipped that year, so I want to relive it. Oh no, I don't. Okay.
I often just gloss over that year.
So this is a summary of all 4 programs and what the proposed funding allocations look like and the implementation timeline. I believe we're going to enter into discussion more about the programs themselves, and then we will come back and discuss the allocations together with the projects that were previously proposed by Community Services Division.
And I think the next slide is the recommendations. Is that right, Amy? I
think this is so we provided some discussion questions just to help to formulate what we're looking for. Really, the idea is see if there's support for the first 2 programs that we think should be implemented sooner. Is there support to just move forward with those programs within the next fiscal year? The next question is, should the city really be looking at developing a wealth building program to address those disparate impacts of COVID-19 and how it's financially impacted communities of color more than it has white households? And then to further on that question, I didn't want to give anyone a compound question because you lose half of it. I broke this out in the same venue of wealth building. Should it be presented as a reparations programs for Black community members? And then lastly, should the city develop a tax defaulted and foreclosed acquisition program with financial assistance? That being said, since legislation exists to do this anyway, because it's under existing state law, do we want to provide financial assistance to see if we can make these acquisitions successful? And this would mainly be as a pilot program to see if we can make it work. So we're really looking at assisting very small number of households at this time. And if it is successful, then we could see if it's something we would want to expand. And then I think that leads us to our discussion and questions.
Sorry, was there a slide on the homelessness projects as well?
There is.
There it is.
There's Perfect. 2 slides for the funding. So do we want to go directly into the funding, or do we want to take questions on the 4 programs that I proposed first?
I'm thinking we're ready to do both. My colleagues have my thought is we'll do we'll open up public comments, and then we'll do the council discussion on both the 4 proposed projects and the overall spending plan. Folks okay with that?
Yeah, and if you could kind of go back to the slide with the funding, so we 100% address it, because I know sometimes when there's a lot, we skip 1 or 2.
Yeah, we'll definitely pull up the slides when it's time for council deliberations, for sure. Okay, cool. So I think, did staff have a little bit more? Okay. All right. Fair enough. So we will go to public comments on on the specific housing plan or on the stimulus funding. And I'm not seeing any hands on that. Okay. Colin?
Yes, hello again. I just wanted to comment here as well that these plans look amazing. I think it's a really great way to spend out one-time funds, especially the relocation assistance, as was mentioned, having it be, as Christina mentioned, having it be replenishable over time is amazing. That we can continue to provide that kind of assistance to people in need is a fantastic thing. I also want to speak in support of the wealth building proposal as it is, especially focusing on it. I think it's true and important, as well as a reparations component. I think that's important to speak out in favor of, both because of the disproportionate impact that Black community has felt in Hayward, as well as the fact that it then wealth building for any part of our community then inevitably benefits the city in the long term. And then also I'm going to speak out, of course, again in favor of the trying to pilot the program to help out community land trusts, because I think those are a fantastic way of ensuring that people living in the community stay in the community and invest in the community. So in short, I think these are fantastic plans, and I hope that we're able to, as a city, implement them in a more sustainable fashion once there's funding available. So thank you again, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Okay, thank you. And Lacey Amadei?
Hi again, Lacey Amadei with the Hayward Collective. I just have a brief comment. I hope that staff will understand that the prior praise also extends to this report, which also is very well done and has a lot of good policy. But I also wanted to particularly offer praise to Christina and anyone else who helped with how well done and thoughtful the racial equity analysis was. I feel like this is just such a wonderful context and sets up the council members in such a good position to analyze in order to determine how they're going to give the direction. So thank you very much. And it has just been such an important part of this COVID-19 tragedy. So just thank you. It's so well done. And congratulations again for this report. As you know, it's kind of all one piece of work. I do want to just add, because there's so much to say, I didn't have time to the sales. Oh, I don't know. I can. Well, cut me off. Please cut me off, council member, if I can. But for the sales tax measure, for finding sustainable funding, if it could please be explored to look at other progressive ways to find a permanent source of revenue. I know there's different forms of taxation that can be explored, or finding revenue sources that aren't regressive. So that would be great if some of those could be explored, several, as just part of the options as how we can keep funding these programs if they are approved and get going. Thank you.
Thank you. And just FYI, I could really quick on regarding the sales tax or the ongoing funding from some kind of tax, the Budget and Finance Committee will actually take that item up at a future meeting. And there will be some it'll be part of the annual community satisfaction survey. And so there'll be the opportunity for more commentary on that specific item. Yes, Assistant City Manager Ott.
I just wanted to mention, we are not wedded to a sales tax measure. I think some of what we said local tax measures. So some cities are doing vacant parcel taxes or parcel taxes. So I just wanted to clarify that we are not proposing a local sales tax.
Okay, thank you. And I'm up, Didicus. Didicus, go ahead.
Okay, unmute. There you go. Yep. Directly to that point, in the United States, we tend to tax our land based on the improvements instead of on the property itself. If we were to move to a property or a land tax, it would be a more equitable distribution of wealth, and it would also go a long ways towards funding many of the programs that we're talking about. So as we're talking about long-term permanent funding. I think we should investigate that more thoroughly and see what the effects could possibly pencil out for us. The land trust would be more than happy to help you with that. But the land trust is a a means of achieving equity, and that's why it's very, very important to both support it and to use it as your primary point of attack on this housing issues and housing challenges. There you go.
Okay, thank you. And not seeing any other hands, so I will close this public comment period and go to, so I do see your hand, Aisha. I also know that you spoke first last time, so I just want to offer the opportunity, as we have done in the past, to see if Councilmember Salinas wanted to go first this time.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. And did you want the financial slides? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, and I have the PowerPoint also up too. So I just want to make sure that I answer the questions that staff needs us to answer. So
great. So why don't we pull up the question slide? Perfect.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
So one, I'm again genuinely happy with the context, and again, I want to thank the full staff from the housing team who works on this. I think that, you know, Dr. Cole Bloom, as well as Ms. Lobadan and obviously Ms. Morales, have done a wonderful job understanding the equity is a priority for us, number one. Also making sure, you know I have talked to our assistant city manager and city manager so much about making sure that whatever program we have, it continues. It's not a one-off and one and done and move on with our lives. So I'm really, really happy to see that. I did eventually want to talk about kind of the down payment thing, because eventually I really want that to be kind of a core focus as well. But I also just want to highlight, I think that Ms. Morales deserves an award for all the stuff that she has done around housing, because literally in the 3 years she has done an incredible job, whether it was around rent, whether it was around tenant protections, whether it was around anything. I genuinely believe, you know, she was a key piece of a lot of our good policies. So I just want to give kudos to her, just because you know, we haven't seen each other. So I just want to say kudos. And if we're giving internal awards, you know, my nomination is there. Okay. But I do want to say that this is also to the public. This is a significant amount of investment from the city. Most cities do not invest this much. And I'm glad that we are not only investing, but also prioritizing. The fact that the median family income of a Black family in the United States versus a white family is nearly $100,000 of a difference was a statistic that I actually used in a presentation this past month. So I'm glad that I saw it again. It's sad that it's still the reality, right? So just overall, the foreclosure prevention loan program, and I want to highlight this to the public, that a lot of these programs, you know, it says number served, 60 low-income households, and the proposed funding. I'm fine with the proposed funding, and I think that the priority is our most vulnerable populations. And I don't know how we will measure, and I know that you guys are eventually going to come forward with a more detailed plan, but just making sure that we measure exactly. You know, some people complain about a lottery program, and I kind of want to just be able to track what does their vulnerability look like, right? Is it, you know, they're one payment away versus, you know, they've been in a program and been successful in paying on time regularly and, you know, need a little bit more help. So I kind of want to just understand, you know, what we are eventually going to measure, right? So I do just want to highlight that piece of it. But number served, also, I just wanted to ask, is that number served per year, per what?
That is the number of people served by the amount we're allocating to the program. So it includes the funding from the CDBG funds and also the stimulus relief funds.
Okay, but are we looking at this annually or every? I just want to see the timeline wise.
It's one-time funding, so it would be once. So it's until we fully expend the funds. So ideally, we would be providing assistance to some people who won't need the financial assistance to be stabilized. Maybe the attorneys can help them by negotiating a repayment plan or a loan modification, or help them to refinance. But maybe those that need financial assistance, we're estimating that would be about 60. So we do expect it would help more people, because there may be people who don't need financial assistance.
Yeah.
And then as we look, if there's continued problems and we see there's additional need, I guess the hope is that the federal government would be continuing to provide financial assistance, and we would have that identified need, the established program, and we could continue to fund it.
Perfect. And obviously you guys know, I've talked about, my family being, having their family home foreclosed on during the economic downturn. A lot of the real estate experts have stated that after the moratorium ends this month, at the end of this month, that there may be a significant amount of foreclosures. So I think for me, this is priority, given that, this whole effort is in response to COVID, right? So I just want to highlight that there. So I'm happy with this program and whatever we can do. And I do agree with your analysis that some people won't need the financial help, but may need the legal help also, just because, the moratorium stated that you would have to pay back your rent or whatever the case may be, and negotiate with your landlord. So just also even thinking on that end, but I know this is primarily property owners. So I do appreciate that, and I'm fully supportive of that.
Could I just jump in for 1 second? I just wanted to clarify one thing, is that if the council approves the expenditure plan on the July 13th, I just want to be clear, these 2 programs we will be implementing immediately. So I just want to make sure we won't be coming back with these 2 programs. That was at least our intent. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that's our proposal.
100%. And because July 13th is kind of like, I want to say 13 days after the moratorium is lifted statewide, I just want to see, are we kind of in the background already working on this and making sure that it's available slightly ahead of time, or?
Yeah, I'll let Christina jump, but a lot of work went into even preparing these programs to get ready for this. So I think, Christina, you have a pretty good idea of how you're going to implement this. Is that correct?
We do, but the foreclosures won't happen immediately, because they have to file a notice of default that requires to be filed and held for 90 days. I think prior to that, there's a 30-day period where the lender has to try to negotiate to provide a workout plan. And then following the notice of default, there's, I think, another 90-day period for filing the notice of trustee sale. My understanding is that that process can, while it's set up for about 7 months, it can take up to a year. So we still do have time, but our intent is to try to stand this program up immediately so that we can help people quickly, because there's also lots of anxiety involved with losing your home. So we're very cognizant of that. So as people get their notice of default, the more we can refer them to resources, the better. So we intend to work on it quickly, but I do think it will take us several months to get the program stood up.
Okay, no, and I appreciate that clarity. And, as much as possible, whenever this is fully approved by the full council, social media blast to make sure that it is well known by our larger public. So I again appreciate that. That is priority for me. The Relocation Assistance Emergency Fund. I was kind of wondering why it's $250,000, and I was thinking to myself, like, can that be increased? And potentially, I would lean for it to be slightly increased. But I also appreciate kind of the clarity of where we're kind of, prioritizing where this works. So I do support it as well, because I think we've seen a lot of bad actors, but I also want to see if, in the last year when we did kind of the just cause eviction and so forth, to see if there are any other loopholes or, situations where people are taking advantage. So, but for the most part, I fully support that. And back to the wealth building reparations program. Okay, so can I ask just the background as to, I know, my biggest goal with all the programs was for it to be a continuous fund so we can kind of have it 10 years down the road and, not be impacted, things like that. Did you guys look at the San Mateo program and other programs for the down payment assistance, the loan being sold to the bank and, that person, the homeowner, just paying one payment to their bank and the city getting their funds fully back and being able to help the next family?
I did not look into the program, I think because the conversation about the program changed, where we were looking more at the wealth inequities and being framed in that context. I think that we have plural needs in the context of wealth building versus down payment assistance, where I think it can be an option for the wealth building. It really does take a borrower who is more financially stable, usually have higher income, and will still need a financial amount of assistance in order to if the lower the income they are, the more assistance they would need to make it feasible. So that's the challenge with the amount of funding that was available for this program and what it was trying to accomplish. It seemed like it needed to be broadened so that we could look at different financial goals in addition to down payment assistance.
Okay. So on this particular one, I still have a question mark for myself. And I'm just being very frank about it. I don't mind the wealth building program as was stated in the staff report, but I know I had a very different vision for the down payment assistance program. And the reason why I state that is that we all know that being able to purchase a home is one of the biggest ways and most impactful ways to create generational wealth. So that's still, a priority. The options within the wealth building programs, I think that I don't know which slide it was, but it was, the several options that we had. Can you guys go to that slide? Sorry.
Amy just stepped away from right when you answered it. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. That was bad timing. If I could just put a finer point, I just want to be clear. I think if the desire, and maybe we need to talk about the reparations piece of this, because when we started looking at the down payment assistance as a potential reparations, that's where, when we started talking to people about potential reparations, then it felt like, well, you're helping, essentially the better off kind of in the Black community. And then it started, well, what are other ways that we could help a cross section of the Black community build wealth? And that's where we started expanding it. So I do wonder in the discussion, if you really want to do a reparations program and that resonates with the task force, then I think probably we'd recommend trying to be a little more expansive in the definition. If you want to really focus on down payment assistance and home ownership, then we might want to not go down the reparations route. I mean, Christina, would you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree.
And so I think there might be this question that the task force wants to talk a little bit about, is reparations or no, because when we did start researching other programs and talking to different community members, that was the issue that came up, and trying to be more expansive and serving a larger cross section of the Black community.
Okay, so number one, I don't like the if this or that. It's putting me in a tough spot because I'm genuinely torn. I still believe in the down payment assistance program. And I do think that people who are ready to maintain a 30-year mortgage, and obviously we want people who are able to maintain that and long-term longevity around that, I still would like to see a down payment assistance type of program, number one. In regards to reparation, and I know you guys keep referencing that you guys have spoken to a lot of people. Can you reference who you guys have been speaking to?
I will say, we did some research. Evanston has a recent program. It's actually being litigated right now, we believe, that our understanding. And so we did some research, Christina, and then you want to talk a little bit about some of the research your team did?
Yeah, so, we have spoken with a community member who is both has experience in financial planning and development, and has done a lot of personal development of her own business model that looks at supporting wealth building opportunities and investment into properties. And so we had a discussion with her as well to kind of see what, in terms of providing opportunities for people, for Black community members, what is the most critical thing. And I think one of the things that resonated was that we need to provide an opportunity where people can grow that money. So whether it is an investment source, whether it's property, and when we look at this program and the amount of assistance, it could be individuals pooling those resources together to purchase rental property. I mean, it could take shape in many forms, and I think it's still yet to be seen from community members how we would design it. What we've thrown out in terms of these examples for direct assistance are really what staff has come up with, but I think we are open to the fact that the community need is different than what we think it should be. And I think we have to hear more from the community before we can fully develop the wealth building program.
So this is the particular piece that I have the most trouble with because, you know, it's slightly torn. I will say this, I don't know who you guys exactly spoke to. So I would like to know the source eventually. And if you guys don't want to name the name right now, I understand that. Number one. Number two is the fact that I specifically want this for home ownership individual families, right? So right now, what I heard also and what I see from commercial business assistance grants, as well as the multifamily property that you stated to build wealth, I don't necessarily want that in the core focus of what we're doing here around housing. So I would move that aside and potentially put that in the economic development piece of it, which Assistant City Manager you also oversee. So, and we have allocated money for that as well. So I just want to be very specific. For me, this is about making sure families are housed as a priority, right? And those families build wealth by owning their home, townhome, condo, whatever the case may be. So I want to splinter that off. I think the input of whoever this person is, very viable comments, but it seems to mix business out of this, and that's not what my goal is here. So I think that this piece has to be vetted a little bit further. I would also like to talk to more members more publicly about what that actually looks like. So that is my concern there. The education assistance grants, I also think potentially should be in the economic development piece. And it's not just education assistance, but also student loan forgiveness of some sort, because I think that a lot of young people are burdened with that. So just cleaning that up, if you will, and potentially separating this out a little further.
So, and I could make obviously for the other task force members, as you think about this, we absolutely agree with you. We need to do a lot more community outreach. And that's why, there was controversy about some of the other programs. They're being litigated. There's a lot, this is new, and we want to jump in and do something that new and try some things. But we absolutely agree. And so maybe there are some questions, depending on what the other task force members want, that we can be asking, should this just be a down payment assistance program? Maybe we try to emphasize that and see what kind of feedback we get, and we can bring that back to you. So maybe there's some ways we can structure this and the questions that we ask the community when we do that outreach to try to get at some of the things that you're saying, Councilmember Hobb, but I'm open to.
Definitely. And I'm not opposed to any part of it. It's just, very specific scope. Right. And also, even when you mentioned the multifamily piece of it, I've been through a program that specifically talks about, multifamily homes and so forth. And I do know for people of color, it's actually harder to get a business loan too. So I completely agree with that. And I do want that part of the larger discussion, but not necessarily for the housing discussion. And then I do want to highlight so specifically being a reparations conversation. We all know that in the nation, the Black community has been wronged in more than enough ways that for centuries, to be honest with you. I do agree with a reparations program. I will also say that it's not just Black people. We also know that Latinos, Chinese Americans, and others were also discriminated against in different ways around land ownership, immigration, and much more. So I don't know if we want to broaden that scope a little bit, but I also want to know the legalities behind it, because I know I've had a conversation about this in particular about reparations. And, I want the public to know that, there's a lot of conversations that happen one-on-one and so forth. And the Equal Housing Opportunity Act, does that limit us in doing this?
I do think it requires that we explore it more with the city attorney's office. What we're seeing from the program in Evanston is that there was some grounds because it was tied to specific harm that was done by the housing policies. So when it's tied to that specific instance, you are you're making amends for the harm you did to that community. So we would thoroughly vet it with our attorneys, and I think this is why we put this on a longer term project, because it needs a substantial amount of time investment in order to investigate these questions and really work with the community on what makes sense.
Okay, so I would like that fully vetted, just because I don't want to get excited and like my hopes, crush, the very next week or something like that. I do just want to see if we are allowed to do that, because I know even when we talked about, Hayward residents getting priority preference and specifically certain communities and things like that, that's what was told to me last time. So I just want to double check. But I would be interested in a multi-pronged model, because I still want this for, the everyday Hayward resident, as well as with a focus on reparations. And I think that's like a 50-50 approach. Personally, I think that's, what in my mind would be fair, because we do have a larger community as well that we have to service. And I don't see this, comes every day. So I just want to highlight that. On the next slide, in regards to tax defaulted properties, I'll make it very quick. I fully support this. I know that when we saw the list, council often sees the list of from the assessor's office, the tax defaulted properties. It's not a lot, so I want the public to know that sometimes it's only like 15 to 30 properties. So it's not significant, if you will. You don't think it's 100 or so. Why specifically approximately 6 units, though? I was a little semi-surprised about that.
So we're estimating between $125,000 to $150,000 per unit, it being needed in terms of a subsidy. So in the analysis we did last year for the Homeless and Housing Task Force for subsidies required for community land trusts, based on our conversation with Oakland Community Land Trust, they needed approximately $150,000 per unit to be able to create a project. And then the remainder they acquire through private financing. Okay. And then in terms of if it's a tenant trying to acquire the property they live in because it's being foreclosed, considering the down payment assistance analysis that we did last year at 120% of the median, that is the amount that would be needed in order to help somebody have enough for down payment assistance to be able to bridge the gap between what they can afford and what the potential price would be. Our expectation is that the price on these properties would be lower because they are foreclosed and tax defaulted property. So we may be able to shrink the size of the assistance that is needed. But the other objective would be to target a lower income population if the price to acquire the home is lower. So especially in the case where we would be able to transition somebody from being a tenant to a homeowner, we would be able to use kind of that maximum assistance amount to get down to what their income can support in a first mortgage. So it gives us that flexibility.
Okay. And I know the city manager and I spoke to a couple of different folks regarding this program before it's been presented like this. They did ask specifically, if a home was foreclosed, are we going to kick out the original tenant? And that may also displace Black and brown people at a higher proportion than we'd prefer. So I just want to make sure that whoever that original tenant is, they get first right of refusal potentially also before we even convert it to affordable housing or something like that. And I just wanted to know, was there any thought around that?
Yeah, the intent is not to displace anyone. And I think that we've been looking at the tax defaulted list, and for the most part, a lot of those properties have been owner occupied. And it has been a conversation we had with the Community Land Trust to kind of help think tank around what kind of solutions could we provide if there are existing homeowners that are about to lose their property. And so that would be the idea, is that we would really either be working to help keep those individuals in their home. It does pose challenges because you're normally putting a resale restriction or limiting equity on a property that somebody currently owns. So it can be a difficult thing to get current homeowners to agree to, but we're definitely exploring those means. And ideally, we would be helping them acquire vacant properties. And in the case where we use the foreclosed property as tenant occupied, we actually help that tenant buy the home.
100%. I agree. I just wanted to make sure that the thought process, included that. But also, I just want to ask, why just single family homes? Why not also condos, townhomes, and all the in-betweens?
Comes down to funding. Looking at the funding amount available with $1 million, the larger the property. Now, it could be as we develop this program, or we look at the tax defaulted list, maybe it is a quadruplex that is available, that makes a lot of sense for community land trust. I don't think in that context we are excluding it. It's more in the context of the foreclosed properties targeting the single family home. It's a lot more complicated to acquire property amongst individuals and establish their ownership and their rate of return on that investment than it is a single family home with one owner.
Including condos and townhomes. Wouldn't it be there
the condos and townhomes would be included in a single family home, single unit property, let's say.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
No, I fully agree with this. I wish we could toss more money this way, but I'm excited for this. This was something I was very eager to see. Other than that, I just want to make sure I hit all your. I feel like I did. In regards to the funding, like I said, the Relocation Assistance Emergency Fund, maybe if we can double that to $500,000, I'm not sure, but that's an ultimate goal. But overall, I am fully supportive of this, and then I do just want certain things vetted a little bit more, and I know it will be when it returns to us. So again, thank you very much for the hard work and kind of just making sure that all the nuances are, for the most part, going to be discussed.
If you don't mind, I just want to share the accolades with my team. I've heard so many kudos, and I just want to we've acknowledged Amy Colbloom, who worked on the report. I also want to acknowledge Doris Tang, who also did a substantial amount of research for the report, and they've really helped put together a report that provided not only information about our proposals, but what's led us to make these conclusions. So I want to thank them both.
Definitely. You guys have done a fantastic job, and anybody else that's not here, I think the entire city council and the city as a whole is genuinely appreciative of the work that you guys have been putting in.
Very definitely. Councilmember Salinas.
Thank you. Let me see if I can whittle my comments down briefly here. So I am happy with the recommendations, and I think there's I think they, just based on what I've heard staff report and based what's in the report, clearly you guys have it's thoroughly researched. You guys have presented a good plan. And doable. I think it's actually doable, and so it's and that's what's good about any plan, right? That it's actually doable. So the recommended stimulus allocations. I mean, sure. I do. I support them, and I'll certainly support this when it comes to us on council. And I know we're limited by the amount of dollars that we're getting, in the first place. So and I think staff has certainly thought this through, and so I'm happy with the allocation. Look at the wealth building allocation of $2 million. If we can't nail down a specific program, is it possible to take that allocation and apply it to, say, foreclosure prevention loan program or the relocation assistance emergency program? I know these are all proposed numbers, but is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because this came up when we presented some of the other stimulus projects to the Council Infrastructure Committee. So I'll be making sure to incorporate this into the July report to the full council. But what I think the finance director and I have talked about is that we are going to recommend an appropriation, that the council approve an actual appropriation kind of by reso for that first year. We're going to probably also ask you to approve an entire plan for all of the money, but that is really going to be a working document. And I think it kind of needing the direction to kind of, yes, this is generally our plan, but here's our 1 year plan that we're going to appropriate the funds for. And then I think we're going to come back to you every 6 months, if sooner, if necessary, because I think there's some things that are going, like you're saying, that are going to change. So if we do some outreach and there's really not an interest in a wealth building reparations program, or they prefer a down payment assistance program, or we have money right now programmed for the financial funding gap on the fire training center. But if our Measure C funds come in higher, we might not need that. So we're absolutely thinking of this as a working document, or kind of a working approval that we know we're going to have to amend it and change it. And there's going to be opportunities to shift funds around. I think that's probably a little less so on those initial programs, right? So for the foreclosure prevention loan program, relocation assistance fund, we're looking for direction to allocate those funds now so Christina and her team can get started. But if we have more money, then you may, and Christina's getting all kinds of requests for relocation assistance that we hadn't anticipated, then at 6 months, we could shift some of those other funds that maybe are in other programs that we didn't need, and we shift more to Christina to do more on that. So I think, because we don't know all the need yet. And so I do think we have to think of this as kind of an evolving plan.
Yeah.
Does
Good.
that help?
Yeah. Good. So question number one is yes. So I'll make that easy. Now, developing a wealth building program, absolutely, I'm in support of this. But and I have to agree with the statement staff made about wealth building is it manifests in a lot of different ways, right? People build wealth differently. Some people build wealth through opening up a business. Some people build wealth, going to school, right? Some people build wealth by buying a home, and so I am I was, as you were talking about it, I was even thinking about and I know it was I know putting in economic development was thrown out there, but wealth development is also as you put in your slide here, hold on a second, housing counseling, financial planning, business and career counseling services. This looks like something that is housed in community services in the library, right? And this, it would be interesting to see, thinking about, asking the library to think about, what does wealth building look like if housed in the library, right? And is it literacy, right? Is it literacy development? Is it education development? There's, one of the things that I have found quite interesting, and I mean, and very, happy to participate in some of the activities is, Tiburcio Vasquez has the Promotora program, and and over the years, and I've been involved with it for many years, and over the years, the promotoras, they have talked about these kinds of things, and they've talked about opening up their own business. They've had wealth building conversations, right? And they've also talked about, where, what agency could they go to get that, to get that, they talked, they would talk about, of course, learning English, right? And developing English skills is part of the equation. Financial planning, that's part of their conversation. A lot of the promotoras have, a lot of them have side hustles, right? I've talked about this on the council where, they're selling, stuff, food and non-food and other things, out of their garages, out of their cars. And I mean, it's quite interesting how they're sort of generating resources to create wealth. And of course their ultimate goal, some of the conversations that I've been in, their goal is to buy a home. I mean, that's really, that's what they're really sort of looking at. So with all of that said, I also would be remiss if I did not say that everything we know about, and I'll just use academic achievement, and I'll just use that as the data point for now. Everything we know about academic achievement, one of the greatest powerful variables in the increase in academic achievement is housing stability, right? And so, when I think about wealth development, if we were to invest in, getting folks stable in housing, and preferably in owning their home, that would exponentially, help a family. We also know that home ownership, all of the, mental health, factors that are caused with housing instability, right? Owning a home or just having secure housing, but in this case, I'm extending it to saying owning a home. Owning a home is it goes beyond than just generating wealth, and so I would like to see investment put into this, because I think it's important. Where do we house it? I mean, do we house it in housing, or do we house it in, say, in the library, or do we house it in economic development? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how this conversation unfolds. And so I do support it, and I do support and I am interested very much so in the conversation that comes out of it. Number 3, should the wealth program be designed to provide reparations to Black community members? Do we call it wealth building? Do we call it reparations? Sometimes naming something is important, and because it evokes sort of the value, it evokes the purpose, and my thought on that is, I think building wealth encompasses a lot more activities, right? And if we invest in wealth building activities and wealth building strategies, then we can include more groups that were negatively impacted by the insidious practices of racial covenants and other just horrendous discriminatory housing practices that has plagued not only our county, but our state in this country for generations and generations. You know, when I was reading the staff report, you know, I should also say that I'm in the middle of grading papers. my paper, I have a deadline at 11 o'clock tonight, and you know, you know, part of you know, we talk a lot about this in my own classes, and you know, one of the examples that I always talk about is, you know, look at the layouts of communities, right? If we look at, you know, how racism and historical legacies of discrimination and even Jim Crow, if we really want to see tangible examples of it, look at where people of color live. And I mean, just here in Alameda County, just, you know, I always cite the Matthews v. Andrade case, 1946, where, you know, where it challenges prohibiting African Americans, Mexicans, Chinese, Japanese, and Native Americans from owning land in Alameda County, or even being inhabitants on property in Alameda County, except if they are servants, right? And if you look at how, so we have that legacy that we've been dealing with. The other legacy that we deal with is, look at the neighborhoods. I mean, Chinatowns are in Chinatown. Chinatowns are located in where they're at specifically because of zoning, right? If you look at, you know, every Mexican, every Latino barrio in the East Bay has one street in common. That's East 14th and Mission Boulevard, from Oakland all the way down to, you know, Fremont. And we can keep going, but, you know, there's been a lot of redevelopment down south of Fremont. But, you know, if you look at, you know, the Fruitvale, A Street barrio, Tennyson barrio, Dakota barrio, Irvington barrio, all these neighborhoods, all were built, they were deliberately planned, they were deliberately built for Latinos. Russell City, right? Another example of the legacy of Jim Crow. And then of course, the placement of the relocation of Russell City to Kelly Hill. And so we see these examples of communities of color that historically, and when I say historically, I mean for generations, you know, that have been dealing with racism at every level and through every agency. You know, there's a really good book, I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but there's a really good book called Fit to Be Citizens by Natalie Molina, and where she looks at how public health scares, and this was one of the books I read coincidentally this year, how public health scares, and one man, Dr. Lindley, was primarily responsible for segregating and partitioning Los Angeles, the whole Los Angeles basin. And he did it by health scares. And so anyways, I say all of that and I sort of put my remarks in that context, because I think wealth building captures more communities that have been, you know, have been working through and have been coping with and have been, you know, struggling through this insidiousness of, you know, of racism and discrimination, particularly around housing and in urban development. And there's examples all over Hayward I can point to where, you know, we've completely historically, through policies, have historically neglected families and communities of neighborhoods of color. And so my preference would be, should we build a wealth building program? Absolutely. And I think I'm excited to see what happens. Ms. Ott, you talked about having a robust community engagement plan around this discussion. I think it's a discussion we should have in the city. The state, the governor has appointed a commission. It'd be interesting to see what comes out of the commission. But I've always been somebody who, if we are going to craft something, I want to craft something that is Hayward, and I want to craft something that benefits Hayward, and I also want to be very mindful of the word equity. Equity is, and I appreciated the comments that you made around even with the foreclosure. No, what was it? I forget the down payment assistance program, where those programs actually benefit more people that are mortgage ready, right? And looking at that through an equity lens, an equity lens would be really looking at subgroups that are the most negatively impacted, or the most negatively targeted, and have been working through this historically. And so I want to be, so if we're going to use an equity lens, and if we're going to use a racial lens, then let's apply it, and let's look at those community members and subgroups. Let's just sort of broaden it out a bit. Let's look at those subgroups that have been impacted, and build something around that. That there is a community benefit for Hayward. So hopefully I was able to sort of articulate that, and hopefully that it gives you enough. But I think for me, the wealth building, I think, is central, because there's a lot of people out there that are looking for someone to invest in them, and I think that we can benefit. Should the city further develop a tax defaulted and a foreclosure property acquisition assistance program with financial assistance? And I forget if you said that this wasn't fully vetted, or was this fully articulated yet, or where are we at on number 4?
We would still develop this program further and come back to the task force next fiscal year with a more developed program.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I would totally support that. So those are my 4 responses, and I apologize for the history lesson. Thank you.
Yes, and I'll be grading your dissertation later, Professor Salinas. Okay. So yes, I want to add my appreciation to everybody for great work and really insightful proposals that really reflect the community, both on this item and the last item. So let me do the questions first, and then I'll see if I have other comments that don't come up then. So should we do the stimulus funds? Yes. Done. And I appreciate that this is evolving. So, as we see the needs, as we see the programs develop. And the other piece, I'll just sort of put a little placeholder in as if moving around to current projects is the plan B, right? We have plan A, we have plan B to move around within, and I'll add a plan C as a placeholder of, there are a couple different groups that are working on tiny homes projects that could further this, either ownership or at least rental, but deeply affordable by design housing. And so it may make, in which, $1 million or $500,000 might really make an impact on those. So I just want to put that out there as a, one of those things that we think about as this continues to evolve and as we understand the needs that have already been identified. Plan number 2, yes, we should do a wealth building program. I love that this has evolved from a, we know what the solution is, to the folks who are affected by the issue can drive the solution. I certainly came to these conversations with a certain thing in mind, and I really appreciate that this has evolved and is thoughtful, and again, is building on the strengths of the people affected. And I think when I think about the shallow subsidy program, I think that same thing, that there could be opportunity there, that maybe it is, I know it's building on the existing infrastructure of rent subsidy, but maybe what somebody really needs is that opportunity to finish school in that moment, or, is it that if we provide some rehab funding, the unit becomes more, deed restricted? I know that's more complicated. So, but the idea that the person, whether we're talking about this wealth building program or the shallow subsidy, that the person can have some empowerment to say, this is the thing that will prevent homelessness or that will build wealth, depending on the goal of the program. And it also seems like the opportunity to wrap some of our other programs around. You talked about some of those earlier, and I'm going to jump back over to the shallow subsidy just from a timing standpoint, just to try and be efficient with my comments. But the idea of connecting, for instance, the shallow subsidy people to the GED program at Hayward Adult School, if that's a need, or the Hayward Promise Neighborhood programs, or the food pantry programs. What are the things that are going to help that family stay long-term stable? Some other things about that, but I'll come back to it. So yes, on the wealth building program, and yes, on the tying this to for Black communities members. I think as if I understood Professor Salinas correctly, in tying the nexus of these funds to harm done really is important. And whether we use that around the Russell City lens or where that needs to be, that I agree is the community conversation. But we spent a year talking about and shouting about Black Lives Matter. And so this is where that rubber meets the road. So yes, we do prioritize Black community members for this funding. It's not that much funding. It's only one time. But the idea of, but this, to Mark's point earlier, this is the kind of thing that I do see people getting involved, excited about. The opportunity to change the equation in a meaningful, substantive, long-term way. That's something I think we could do really well. And I think there's a couple opportunities to engage with folks. The Russell City, former Russell City residents have a network in the community. And so tapping into them for insights. There is the Promotoris. Thank you, Mark, for raising that. I think that's a great group. And I appreciate that, Aisha, that you brought up the student loan repayment. That may be one of those flexible uses of this dollars. Absolutely. Maybe it's microloans. That's one of those places where I was thinking that people could get excited about, private funding could get excited about. And that there is, the Juneteenth opportunity coming up, and whether or not we're ready to have any community questions vetted at that point, or the community services group, which has, issued us a letter to do exactly this program. That group can also be a resource in terms of developing the questions to consider and the community engagement. And then, yes, the tax defaulted properties, yay! Excited about that too. And I think there's my hope here is that it's an opportunity to really start something that has lasting impact. Whether that's tenant ownership directly or tenant ownership facilitated by a community land trust. Certainly open to both of those. I'm not particularly interested in the nonprofit housing developers. I understand why it's back pocket idea in terms of the deadline for expending these funds. But I feel really confident that, this might be one of those places where, okay, if there isn't a community land structure, land trust structure, or tenants are still reluctant to transition into ownership for whatever reason, maybe this is the pivot of these funds becomes the tiny home thing. But I really am excited about this, the tax defaulted, capturing the tax defaulted properties, creating the foreclosed properties, and maybe the community land trust helps with the things that our housing authority cannot do, or maybe that's a transition entity, because I know the city, we don't need to be in the position of managing property long term, but if the land trust needed a little bit more time, maybe that's the interim. And so I appreciate that this needs to cook some more, and the great minds behind it. So looking forward to that. And what I'm really hoping is that what we're creating is this long-term mechanism to create an infrastructure to capture properties as they become available, as maybe a family decides that they don't necessarily need a property or don't want to manage a property, that this can come into there. So I'm excited about the possibilities that this holds. And I appreciate that it's being thought of as a pilot project for a specific number of units. And I'm hoping that what also comes out of this is an infrastructure that allows us to go forward. So I know that was a lot, but I'm hoping that was somewhat clear. And if not, ask me. And then can you go to the 2 funding slides, please? So this one, okay. And then the next one. Perfect, thank you. So yes to extending the annex and the warming shelter, and I already talked about the day center. The shallow subsidy, yeah, the one thing I struggle with here is sort of the long term. Does it change the equation, or are we just sort of extending the issue? And I don't know if you have any comments on that, or yeah.
Well, I would. Oh, Jen, do you
go
want to?
ahead.
Because after the council meeting the 20th, we did some more reading and some more research, and I think that these programs are truly designed to be time limited and not be a forever subsidy that a household depends on. And that's where it becomes really important to define our eligibility guidelines and identify the households who would just need them for that temporary time. I think also that the 40 number that we're estimating is a lower end estimate. And also that the one thing I wanted to add is that the program design that we're looking at replicating includes case management services. So what you were talking, Councilmember Lamnon, about linking folks to community college or whatever it may be, that would be something that would be built into the program. It wouldn't just be a monthly check, but it would be the opportunity to be linked to other services that would create longer term housing stability, so that hopefully we bridge the gap for the time that they need it for that 12-month period, and then they are in a more stable place to move forward.
I really appreciate that, Lens. Thank you.
And I would just like to add, I think this could be one that, if you're supportive of it, we do it for fiscal year 2020 or 2022. And then, as we look at the 12-month or 6-month and we evaluate outcomes, if we're not getting the outcomes we want, or the program we don't think is as successful as we want, this, we could kind of, the council's going to be making that appropriation decision in FY23 and 24. So we could shift resources if it's not serving or not being as successful as we hope. So I think you have that flexibility.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that this is a dialogue between city staff and the community and council and outcomes. And it's really exciting times in the city, I think. And then lastly, I was thinking, I know there's subsidy that we're not, stimulus funding that we're not necessarily talking about tonight, but it is on the list for both of the items, which was the encampment cleanup numbers. And it also relates to the strategic plan because, you know, I wonder, and one of the things that I'd like to see before this comes back to us for the allocation of the year one dollars in July is a question of, would it make sense to allocate some portion of the cleanup dollars to creating a legal campsite where folks are at the campsite are charged with keeping it clean, doing some management of that? Is that potentially less expensive than doing cleanups? And does that allow us to have to get to that sanctioned site sooner? It's not the ideal situation, but people are where they are, and if maybe we can meet them there. Does that help? And I know there's more research to be done about that, but I also know that there's a couple cities that have that are starting to take that approach. So I'd be interested in the input.
Okay. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea, especially to look at. Is staffing, and because we anticipate, based on what we understand from other communities, that it has the potential to be controversial. And so, if we're going to avoid, to share that thought with you and some of our thinking.
No, I appreciate that. I had lost track of the front end staff time in terms of community engagement, which we always ask for and does take time. So thank you for that reminder. And yeah, and in that design is also are there some populations that may be maybe less concerning as a pilot group? You know, there's the sanctioned car camping, the caravan site. And we know that our HUSD families are living in their cars. And so does that become a population that folks are maybe a little more comfortable with? Is it near the youth shelter? You know, and one of the things I've heard recently is that power inverters and the ability to charge, especially as we start to deal with the digital divide with more devices, we still need the access to power. So anyway, one of those things to think about. Obviously, you guys probably already have. The last question I had, which I was going to ask earlier, is so the youth shelter, is there any of this funding that we need to think about in terms of maintaining the youth shelter in town? And if you don't have an answer tonight, that's okay.
I don't have an answer tonight. Does anyone else on the team? So we may need to get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Does anyone else?
I mean, I know that the shelter has also applied through the community agency funding process. And so funds do go towards that organization through that process. But we can continue to look at ways to support. And I know that part of what we have been working on is helping, and the reason I'm blanking on the name of the organization.
Covenant House.
Thank you. Prepare letters of support for seeking external funding. So there's ways that we have been supporting and moving this forward, but not in this list right here that we're seeing tonight.
No, that's a great point. Thank you. And they are on the Swalwell list. I know the city supported that as well. So thank you for those reminders. Okay. Great. Anything else on this item? We just have a little bit more to wrap up of the meeting, but anything else on this? Seeing none, we will move on to future agenda items. Again, many thanks. Anything from my colleagues? I know it's late. Anything else on future agenda items or other comments? Seeing none. Sorry, I'm just getting to my agenda to make sure I'm following what we said we were going to do. Give me 1 second to get there. Okay. The only question I had under future agenda items was just whenever it makes sense to have some report out about how's it going with foreclosures, evictions, you know, as the moratoria start to end, what are we looking at in the city, and what do we need to be aware of? And, you know, if we need to have that report sooner than September, then fine, it comes to council. But
and is that something that you'd feel comfortable doing as an oral report? Like we could just have it almost as a standing item, and we could just do as an oral report on each task force. Are you comfortable with that?
That's a perfect idea. Thank you.
Obviously, if it influences a program or project and we're going to change it, then that would be different. But I think if we're wanting to just keep you up to date, hey, here are the latest trends and what we're seeing, then we could have that be a standing oral report.
Perfect.
Is that, Christina, does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Not volunteering her for something.
Right. Yeah. Nothing huge. Just, yeah, if there's something that we as the task force need to be aware of. Thank you. Councilmember Wahab.
So even, the oral report, but even if, I don't know if maybe even we just want to be emailed something, kind of like a PowerPoint with some figures and so forth. Maybe that's an option as well.
Yes, it was shared with housing staff.
Thank you. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's comments and work. Have a great night.
Thank you so
much. We're adjourned.
Mm-hmm.